on Thursday afternoons, and that will be from 1:30 until sunset in the Center Street West parking lot. And there will continue to be pop-up vendors at 2 Brookline Place in Brookline Village on Saturday from noon to 5 p.m. Also, this Saturday, the Brookline Education Foundation will be presenting the Robert Sperber Award for Administrative Leadership to Vicki Milstein, the principal for early education programs in the Brookline schools. And this will be at 5 p.m. in the Roberts Auditorium at Brookline High School. There will be a reception following the presentation ceremony. And I suppose we should ask Selectman Goldstein to tell us about the Rotary Dancing with the Stars.
Oh, be glad to. Well, we had the first and hopefully a long string of annual Brookline Dancing with the Stars events last Saturday night. And I think it was just a huge success. They first and most importantly, they raised $85,000 for charities. About $50,000 was the net after the expenses of the event. But second most importantly, it was a blast, I thought. As you know, I participated in it. Happy to report I didn't hurt myself, didn't hurt my dancing partner, who was trained to stay out of my way, so that's understandable.
We think you did a great job of dodging.
Yeah, as far as I know, I didn't embarrass myself, and my wife and kids
were
would have
great.
been
You were
glad to
svelte.
tell me if I was embarrassing. But Erin Galantine and Alan Balsam, two town employees and department heads who danced, were really unbelievably spectacular.
Erin was
And
really amazing.
Deb Holman was the winner of the whole event. Deb Holman, for the headmaster at Brookline High School, in a very energetic display and very precise footwork, did terrifically. And it was very impressive, the whole thing. I'm looking forward to next year when Selectman Wyszynski will be the designated Selectman representative.
And I'm just going to note that Chobi Hoy and Dr. Michelle David and Lisa Wiesel from the Vine Ripe Grill were also part of the dancers for charitable fundraising. Actually, I think Lisa's team raised the most money.
That's right. Lisa Wiesel from the Vine Ripe Grill raised the most money.
Okay, and then we should also report that Brookline Day happened last Sunday, and interestingly, we had, according to the runners in the 5K race, nice, cool gray weather for the race, the road race, and it absolutely miraculously cleared up and was gorgeous for all the families coming to participate in the events, and all of the members of the board, including, I should mention, Selectman Wyszynski, who again has to be away because of business related to his work. But all of the selectmen and the town administrator were there, and I think we all had a great time.
Yeah,
Selectman
I
Daley?
just want to add what a great job the Parks and Recreation Department in particular, but all of DPW was out. The police department was there.
Fire department had a truck.
Yes.
And was giving away a lot of red hats. that
Right.
Were, a lot of kids were wearing.
You know what I think? I think the best part of Brookline Day is all those booths where you have different community organizations and businesses set up to reach out to people. And there's 4 aisles of these booths set up.
Densely packed.
And they're packed with people, and everybody's at those tables, and everybody's learning about the resources in the town, and the committees, and the movements in the town, and they're signing up for stuff, and they're getting involved. It's a beautiful thing to watch those booths in action.
Right. So, we're looking forward to the 3rd annual next year, and I'm sure it will be even better. Moving along, we have someone signed up for public comment. Mr. Ames, come forward to the microphone.
Good evening. I want to address something that happened last Wednesday night at the Selectmen's Diversity Committee meeting. At the opening of that meeting, the chair of that committee, Nancy Daly, indicated that she would not be commenting on the lawsuit that's been filed by a black firefighter for racial discrimination against the town. She indicated that she would not be commenting, one, to preserve the privacy rights of the parties involved, and two, on the advice of counsel not to comment. However, after making those statements, she handed out a letter to all the committee members present, I was there as a guest, and to people who were in the audience. That letter was written by a retired black firefighter in Brookline. The firefighter retired in 2007. The firefighter has been retired since 2007. The letter does not address any of the factual allegations of the complaint, but rather goes on to say that the defendant in that case, a white firefighter, is not a racist, and says that the town is not a racist town. What bothers me and bothers other people I've talked to is that a sitting selectman would distribute a letter that, in my view, and I'll read portions of it, attacks a current employee of the town, the black firefighter who has filed a suit and has every right to file a suit against the town. The letter says, the notions that Gerald Alston, that's the black firefighter who's made the suit, felt that he could not count on the men and women who refused to eat with him to save his life should he find himself in a life-threatening situation are an insult and a dishonor to not only the firefighters of Brookline, but also to firefighters everywhere. It goes on to say, Paul Pender is not a racist, nor does he cultivate or tolerate a culture of intolerance in the firehouse. Like me, he does not discriminate. We discriminate against the dishonest, the incompetent, those who put their fellow firefighters in jeopardy by not doing their duty and by not showing a modicum of courage on the fire ground. I read that, and I think many people read that as an attack on the black firefighter who is suing the town for discrimination. It goes on to say, a culture of intolerance simply does not exist on the Brookline Fire Department. And, given my long history as a resident of the town, a suit alleging a similar culture in the town is fraudulent, ignorant, and deceitful. I think that is a disgrace that a sitting selectman would hand out a letter that accused somebody who was willing to stand up and assert their rights in a civil rights lawsuit of being deceitful, ignorant, and fraudulent. And I think it sends the absolutely wrong message to anyone in the town who would dare complain about discrimination. I think you all should think very hard about what message you are sending as you respond to this complaint. And it's very important that you not chill the rights of people to make legitimate complaints and have those complaints be heard in a respectful manner.
For the record, that was a letter to the editor and was published in the tab and was otherwise not in any way related to the information that members of the board have publicly stated we cannot comment on. It was a piece of information that's been printed in the tab and was freely available to anybody who wanted to read it. Selectman Daley.
I just want to respond because the sequence of events was not quite the way Mr. Ames just stated. In fact, at that meeting, Mr. Ames brought up the case. And it was only at that point that, when I explained that I couldn't comment, but I said, here's one other point of view. It was a letter I had not solicited. I don't know the gentleman. It had already been published on the tab's website. But I would not have handed it out had Mr. Ames not brought the case up.
All right, moving on. The next item is under miscellaneous, and the first thing is minutes from February 17th. I do have a number of corrections, which I will give to Kate, but for members and the public to understand, they're technical changes. One has to do with the manner in which we voted on the item having to do with climate action, the language that we voted, and the other item is the order that we undertook to vote on a transfer of a liquor license that would recorded somewhat differently from the way we actually did it. Any other corrections?
I do have edits also, yes.
Okay.
And just if we, to address one of the issues that you raised, I thought the order of the vote was different on the vote with respect to Cognac Bistro.
Yes, that's correct.
And I thought that the transfer of the common victualler license came first.
That's right, and
And then
we
the
will,
others.
we will correct that. I had
Okay.
written the order down.
I just wanted to make sure that if you were making that correction.
I am.
That we were making the
I-
same
I
correction.
will, I have
Good.
it recorded, and I'm going to give the correct order to Kate so that she can fix that.
Good,
We-
yep, yep.
Okay, other corrections? No?
Do you have your
No.
changes?
No,
Okay.
I don't. I left them in my computer, I forgot to
Alright.
bring it. But I will happily show
No,
them to you
just-
before I,
No, just so that the order conforms.
yeah,
um,
I'll,
Because that's a change that I picked up also.
well, here's my order,
Okay.
handwritten there. Okay, I move that we approve the minutes from September 17th as amended. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And then we move to the next, whoops, let me get my right calendar here. Next item is a acceptance of a grant. Chief, seems like you have two grants here.
Only one from us,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately, one tonight.
Oh, all right.
I'm here to ask that the board accept, on behalf of the emergency management team, a grant in the amount of $7,500 that we applied for and received from the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. What we intend to use this money for is to further develop our CERT program, which is a community emergency response team, which is made up of individual residents of the town who have volunteered their time to be trained in handling emergency management incidents and attend a class. It's a 3-hour class that'll go on for the next 10 weeks. The class currently has 29 members in it, and then I think that'll bring our numbers of citizen volunteers to over 130, or close to 130 volunteers that are trained and active members of the CERT. This team, as you know, gets called out to run our shelters. It was out most recently in the 2013 marathon when it manned staffed the shelter down at Temple Wahhabi Shalom. One thing that we're going to use the money for this time is we're going to run a pilot program, and I think it's one of the first ones, if not the first one in the state, that we're going to pair members of the CERT team with certain senior citizens and people with some needs throughout the community that might not be able to take advantage of some of the resources that we have to offer them in times of emergency. This is going to be able to develop a database. We already have a number of these CERT team members that have volunteered. I think it'd be a very worthwhile program, as we found during some of the blackouts or like the water emergency. We found some people that needed some help in getting some of the assistance that we were offering them. And this preparedness buddy actually pairs them with somebody that will bring the information to them and I think make it a lot easier during those trying times. So it's $7,500 that would be well spent, and I hope that the board looks favorably upon it.
Are there questions for the chief? Selectman Daley?
Yes, good job, and I understand that you are currently looking for some citizens to join the CERT team, is that right?
We just had our opening
Oh, okay,
class last week. With
so you're all set.
29, it's actually, we had hoped to stay at 25. We're up a little bit more, which is a good thing. But we would look to run another one at the end of this cycle. We could easily do one probably in the springtime as well.
Okay.
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 Any other questions for the chief? Then I move that we accept a grant in the amount of $7,500 from the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency in connection with the Citizens Corps Grant Program for the training of new and veteran members of the Community Emergency Response Team and other equipment and activities. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Binka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Chief, there is another item here, which is, and while you're there, we might skip to it, a grant from that the Brookline Emergency Management Team has received from Urban Area Security
Oh, okay.
Initiative.
I didn't know that made it on the calendar. That's
We
my fault.
sneaked it in.
That's
Are you-
good.
Do you have your documents? So,
No, I know what it's
Okay.
about.
Okay.
We have a community notification system, the Blackboard system. It's actually one that the schools currently do. And this is the automatic phone calls that'll be made to people's cell phones or home phones when there's an emergency that we have to notify them of. Because we're members of the Urban Area Security Initiative, every now and then, every other year, we take a look at how the UASI region funds some of the needs, and we take a look at critical areas as a group that more funding should be put into. Last year, we identified community notifications as one of those areas that some of the money that the federal government gives us, we should spend in our communities. Given that, we were able to apply for that $22,000 to cover the cost of this emergency notification system. It'll be totally funded through UASI monies. It's a reimbursable grant, and I'm asking that the board accept that. And I don't have it in front of me, so I know
Well,
it's 22 and change.
it's
27.
actually even
Oh,
better.
27.
It's 27, so you got a little more perhaps than you'd originally imagined.
I just want to
Questions?
say that I was pressed to sign up at the Brookline Day, so your officers were out
Recruiting.
recruiting people to sign up to get on this notification system, so I did so.
Thank you. You know, we had a meeting today at the Emergency Operations Center, and we did bring this up. And we are going to put a push on over the next couple of months, going to certain events around town, such as the Senior Center and some of the more populated buildings, and offer it to the residents of the buildings to sign up, because they can give us their emails, they can give us their cell phones. Anything, our database just comes off the home phones. So it's really critical that people get that information to. It's really simple to sign up. We are going to be doing a press release over the next week or so to the local newspapers and well,
Doing outreach.
social media, to do
Right.
outreach, and hopefully we can get the word out. People can start calling up, sign up through their websites. And it's really simple. I think it'd be worthwhile. And we only use it for emergencies. We don't use it for mundane events or mundane things. It's for an emergency, and when the call gets made, we hope that people listen to it.
Right, and I note that in the information you gave us, we will now be contracting with someone called Blackboard Inc. and be using Blackboard Connect
Yes.
for your emergency automated calls.
We did a lot of work with Kevin Stokes on that. He kind of spearheaded a lot of meetings that we had, and this was the best group we
Okay?
felt to get.
Any other questions or comments for the chief? Then I move that we accept a grant in the amount of $27,793.30 from the Urban Area Security Initiative to be used by the Brookline Emergency Management Team to upgrade and enhance the town's mass notification system. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Binka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the order. The next items are building department change orders. Do we want to ask questions of Mr. Quigley?
I just have one,
Mr. Quigley, please
Brief
come
question.
forward.
more out of curiosity. There was an item for pavers on top of the Pierce School auditorium, and I'm just wondering what that is.
The pavers are a sound absorption system for the condensers that are on the roof.
Okay.
If you recall, we're adding air conditioning, so the condensers make lots of noise.
Okay, they're not pavers as in walking,
Well,
paver.
they actually are,
but that's not the purpose.
Right, it's the
Okay.
mass to
Gotcha.
to grab the sound from the motor sound.
Good.
The units are on vibration isolation anyhow. This is mostly for equipment sound.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
Just an item of curiosity.
Other questions for Mr. Quigley?
No.
Then I move that we approve change orders from the building department, town hall garages repairs phase 3, change order number 1 in the amount of $19,243.32. Unified Arts Building repairs, change order number 1 in the amount of $1,948.61. And in the Pierce School Auditorium, change order number 3 in the amount of $12,324.32. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benko?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. And next, we have a pilot agreement. Mr. Cirillo? And I do see representatives of Newbury College are with us.
Good evening. I appear before you this evening to present a payment in lieu of tax agreement between Newbury College and the town of Brookline. Appearing with me this evening and representing the college is Hannah McCarthy, President of Newbury College, and Paul Martin, Vice President of Student and Community Affairs. I'd also like to publicly thank 3 other individuals who aren't in attendance this evening. First, Joyce Hanlon, Newbury College's VP in charge of finance. Also, on the town side, Gary McCabe, Chief Assessor, and Jocelyn Murphy, acting town council, excuse me. Without their help, without their contributions, we would not be here this evening, so I wanted to thank them. You know, I've often spoken about how long it takes to put one of these agreements together. In this particular case with Newbury College, we have been in discussions for nearly 6 years. And how does something like this occur? Well, when a government asks a nonprofit to consider participating in a pilot program, we're asking a nonprofit to enter uncharted waters. Most nonprofits don't know what a payment in lieu of tax agreement is. They don't know how it works, what the process is, how the values are assessed, or how they could challenge if they disagree with our values. And finally, they have to decide if they could afford to pay. And so we go through a series of meetings throughout the process, taking each of these issues one at a time and resolving them for the best fit of the nonprofit. And over that period of time, both sides take a measure of each other and frankly build trust with each other. And at a point in time, we reach an oral agreement, and one would think that we're ready to go, but then we put it into writing, and then we ship it back out to a series of other people. We ship them out to our town council, the special counsel for the college, board of trustees for the college, and those people weren't at the negotiating table, so we have to bring them up to speed on what we've been discussing. And they, in fact, may have some additional questions. And so we try to answer those questions or come up with solutions to those issues. And finally, we finally get to the same place at the same time. And we're able to put before your board for authorization to approve an agreement. Now, it was 6 years of hard work, but it was worthwhile because I got a chance to meet Hannah McCarthy. That's what was that. I'm going to turn the podium over to her, but before I do, I would like to just briefly talk about the agreement. You have a memo in your packet that describes the numbers, but I just want to verify that, in fact, this agreement follows the policy that was established by the Board of Selectmen in 2007. We have a target of 25%. We ramp up to 25%, which was in the policy. Both sides have an option to renegotiate or opt out of the agreement in each of years 7, 14, and 21. And so with that, I recommend this is a good agreement for both sides. It's a win-win for both sides, and I would recommend that the Board of Selectmen accept this agreement. And with that, I'd like to turn the podium over to President McCarthy.
And I want to thank Steve for reminding me that it was 6 years. I thought it was only 4. I certainly put those early years behind us. And, but I just can't say enough about how well we worked with Mr. Cirillo and with Gary. Because they were patient, they were thoughtful. They had some goals, we had some goals. And they were willing to wait until we could come to a point where where we really could review it and talk about it and make it happen. We're proud to be members of the Brookline community. It's important for us to be here on Fisher Hill and part of this community in what we think are very important ways. We've been extraordinarily well-served by so many departments in this town. And I had to learn when I came that it was a town and not a city, but truly have been well-served, particularly police, fire, Department of Public Works, people who probably don't often have people say they do nice work, have really been tremendous. So we're glad we finally got it done. You will get our first payment at some point in the future when you accept this and Steve bills us. And we will be here ratcheting up to 25% over the next 25 years. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Any members have a question for Ms. McCarthy? Yes, Selectman Benka?
Actually, a comment. Obviously, Newbury College didn't have to do this. It's voluntary on your part, and for that, I and the Board of Selectmen, and I also, I think, speaking for the town, is very appreciative. And also, as somebody who voted at Newbury College, the college and the town really have worked together. And we're very appreciative for that. When the renovations were going on at the Runkle School, Newbury College opened its doors to the town for our town elections, and that made life a lot easier for the town clerk and for the residents of a couple of precincts in the town. So thank you for that also.
Well, you're welcome, and we're delighted that we were able to do it.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, well, I want to thank both sides for all the hard work that went into coming to this agreement. But I'm delighted to hear, we think that our nonprofits in town get a lot of benefit from our excellent town services, and I'm delighted to hear you say that you recognize that and appreciate it. Thank you.
I've been president and worked in several different communities, and the fire department and the police department really are exceptionally well-trained, and we believe we're very, very well-served, and we thank you for that.
Well, and I'm just going to add that I know that the college suffered a bit during the construction of the housing at Olmsted Hill, but also provided good support, and we appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me add also, because I am probably the college's nearest residential neighbor, that this is exactly the kind of response and behavior that I'm used to as their close neighbor, from Hannah and from Paul, who I see every morning as I walk my dog. And not only have they responded well in this pilot thing, but they respond well when there are issues of parking on the street, and they respond well when there are issues of, and very infrequent issues I'll add, of student behavior, and they're an excellent neighbor. And Hannah, I don't want to catch you by surprise, anything you can report to us about any long-range plans for the college? I know there was some discussion among the Fisher Hill neighbors
We have
recently.
some campus plans in the works, so we're still working on them before we bring them to the planning board. But we're looking at really doing some real development on the campus and trying to determine how and when we will be able to move forward with some of those things. But Selectman Goldstein, I just want to say, I hope our normal response to any request you typically make as a neighbor don't take us 6 years to resolve.
No.
That would be my hope.
Immediate.
And we have worked very, very hard to be good
They've got the
neighbors.
hardest working student population of any college in town because, especially because of the culinary arts program, the students at Newbury College are out working in the evenings and on the weekends, and so there's not the kind of issues you have being a neighbor of Newbury College that you have being a neighbor of some of the other schools which will remain nameless in Brookline.
Well, thank you so much.
And at the risk of advertising it so that more people know about it, is the Weltman Dining Room now open?
Oh, Weltman Dining Room opens the 26th, and so September 26th. Then if there are any reservations left, people can go to our website and click on quick links and find the Weltman Dining Room.
And sample the culinary arts of Newbury
Absolutely.
College.
Absolutely. That's open for dinner. Paul, do you know when we open for lunch? We open for lunch the following week, I think. I think we will open first week of October for lunch. So we're there. We love to have guests and introduce people
Yeah.
to what we're doing on campus.
Actually, Dave Weltman was a former partner of mine.
Oh, really? All
So-
right.
Okay, let's take a vote here officially. I move that we approve a pilot agreement between Newbury College and the town of Brookline, and the agreement which is before us, in the language of the agreement which is before us. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Next item
Thank you.
is a gift. Ms. Dobek, from the Multi-Service Center Brookline Corporation. What a long name.
Also known as the Brookline Senior Center.
Yes, yes, right,
No, that's our official 5013C.
right, right.
I'm Ruth Ann Dobek, Director of the Brookline Council on Aging Senior Center, and I'm here tonight to ask your acceptance of a gift from the nonprofit arm of the Brookline Senior Center in the amount of $47,000 that will go towards the renovation project. As a little background, this is the renovation project that will be bringing the fitness center up to the second floor, which was vacated from the Rogerson Day Health Program. And it will also be updating an additional office space on the second floor, a new conference meeting room, and then phase 2 is in the basement or lower level, updating the meeting rooms into usable space for programs and activities. We are fortunate, and I think it actually will be on the agenda next week, to be receiving CDBG funds. We have in hand a gift from CDBG of $45,000, and then this next year, FY14, CDBG is giving an additional $63,000. So the total cost of this project will cost the town no money in capital outlay. That being said, I also want to publicly thank and acknowledge the work of the building department and Ray Mesak, who has been a contributor and will be helping oversee the project. So again, the town is giving their share by allowing the building department to oversee the project, but it will not cost any capital money from the town. We are continued to be committed and continue our fundraising. If I can put a plug in, again, for the autumn benefit, which will be on October 23rd, because we are additionally raising money for now some of the nicer parts of the project, whether it's new tables, chairs, sound system, the other expenditures. But this project is expected to go out to bid on October 23rd, and we would like the town to have the 47 from the nonprofit in hand as we go to bid.
Thank you. Comments, questions, Selectman Daley?
Yeah, well, I'm delighted that the nonprofit arm of the senior center is contributing this money, and I just want to say echo what Ruth Ann just said. The autumn benefit is always a great evening. It's a lot of fun, and it is the major fundraiser for this charitable arm of the senior center. And in addition to the things she just mentioned, it also provides a lot of the funding, or all of the funding, for the senior bus that goes and picks people up and brings them to and from the senior center. And so it's very important for the running of the senior center that's a success. But I think if people come out and contribute, they will also have a very enjoyable evening there.
Other comments or questions? No?
Now, I look forward to watching Ken Goldstein dance.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And we can get you and Alan
Alan
Balsam
Balsam.
Guess I
to
won't,
do a number.
guess I won't be living this down anytime soon.
Apparently not.
All right, I move that we accept a gift in the amount of $47,000 from the nonprofit Brookline Multi-Service Senior Center Corporation to be used for the renovation project at the Brookline Senior Center. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we look forward to seeing the results.
Thank you.
Okay, our next couple of items are DPW. Who's going to talk to us? Mr. Ditto. I have a technical question. What exactly is a concrete path?
Well, we have 18 of them in town, and under this contract, we're gonna be doing 3. And they are Clinton Path, Addington Path, and Mason Path,
Aha, so they are
Yep.
the paths that are
the footpaths.
paved,
These are
Yes,
the,
as opposed to the paths that are not paved.
well, these are the
exactly.
Frederick Law
No, 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 I
Olmsted
know, I know.
paths, and we have several on my hill.
Yeah.
And they're very important to people who live there, because it's a long way to walk if you have to go all the way around. So everyone uses the paths to cut through.
No, they're a critical part of our pedestrian infrastructure, I guess I would say. I just was kind of curious to know why we didn't call them by a more descriptive name. Anyway.
Well, we had 4 bidders on this contract, and the low bidder, Park Landscape, had the low bid at $91,500. And he was actually the low bidder 2 years ago on this same contract, and he did a wonderful job for us, so we're tickled pink to have him back. If you choose to award this contract and execute it hopefully next week, we'll get started shortly thereafter. But as I said before, it is not a total reconstruction, but really maintenance work to be done on Addington, Mason, and Clinton Path.
Yeah, very important. I had a question, actually, a more serious one. The spread among the bidders was pretty great, and I know sometimes when that happens, you sort of want to go back and make sure that the specs have been clearly understood. I mean, I know you know these contractors, so I assume you are, in fact, comfortable with their bid.
Yes. You might also know them, they do a lot of work for the park department,
Right,
so they know the town.
yeah, I know that. Other questions for Mr. Ditto?
No.
Then I move that we award and execute contract number PW 14-18, repair of concrete paths in the amount of $91,500 to Park Landscape Associates, Inc. of Roslindale, Mass. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Okay, and then emergency street light and fire alarm services?
Yes, this is for extra work required under our annual emergency streetlight and fire alarm service contract. It was a little more than we anticipated. This contract, as you may or may not remember, we authorized for a very small amount, hoping that we can get through the year, and it's originally signed for $8,000, and we exceeded that, so this is to cover additional work. And the code that this is paid out of is a street light repair and maintenance account.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Ditto?
I'm just curious, on page G3 in our packet, there's a reference to Siemens Industry, and there's also a reference to Lewis Tree Service. And
This should be just for Siemens.
okay, so I think we need to clean that up on there are a couple of references to Lewis Tree Service. Okay. I mean, Lewis is not a subcontractor or anything.
No, they're two different Lewis Tree has our tree maintenance contract, and Siemens has a street light maintenance contract. They don't.
Okay.
Good catch.
All right, so it looks like we need to delete Lewis Tree Service, Inc. wherever it appears.
Okay. It doesn't affect the vote, but.
No, No, but
when we get
you
to the
certainly don't
contract
want,
signing.
yeah, right. Okay, I move that we approve extra work order number 1 in the amount of $5,000 for work to be performed by Siemens Industry, Inc. in connection with contract number PW 14-4, emergency street light and fire alarm services. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ditto.
Mr. Ditto, can I suggest that you fix that
Yeah.
and before we sign it?
Oh,
Okay. I'll-
well, I
If you-
don't think we'll sign it, actually, until it's fixed.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
And we'll check.
Well, I mean, if you, I'm just. if
Yeah,
you-
you're taking me by surprise. I'm gonna have to find out
Yeah,
what happened.
I actually just noticed it as I was
Yeah.
sitting here
Right, I
looking at
missed
the
it too.
papers.
Okay.
Okay, we now have a set of temporary wine and malt beverage licenses. Do any members want to hold one? If not, I move in the language in our calendar that we grant a permit to serve beer and wine to Lars Anderson Auto Museum in connection with events on September 26th and October 4th. I move that we grant a temporary wine and malt license to the College of Fine Arts at Boston University in connection with the receptions to be held on October 11th, October 12th, and October 27th. And I move that we grant a temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Brookline Teen Center in connection with a fashion show fundraiser to be held on September 29th. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And we'll move to the main calendar where we will hear from Mr. Nemser about the half marathon.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, welcome.
Happy to be here. On behalf of Dave McGilvery, the race director, and Tom Groke, the executive director of the Boston Athletic Association, happy to be able to talk about the 13th annual Boston Half Marathon, BAA Half Marathon. It's our second event since the tragic events of last April, and we're happy to be back showing the communities that we're back stronger than ever, looking to show that we're returning to normal. The event is pretty much a duplicate of the event that I've described to you in the past, a 13.1 mile race that takes place out of Franklin Park, winds its way along the Emerald Necklace, going through the town of Brookline for a couple of miles along the Pond Avenue corridor. We've been coordinating with the Department of Public Works and the Police Department for all of the support services that they provide. We do a water station, we do a medical station on the streets in the town of Brookline. Everything looks like it's pretty much the same as it's been in the past. Larger field size, we took 7,500 people, and you won't be surprised that it sold out in about 6 minutes this year. So we had a lot of demand for the race. It'll start at 8:30, it'll be over around 11. We'll be in and out of Brookline probably by about 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the race, and again, we're very grateful for the support that the town of Brookline gives to the BAA on this half marathon.
Any questions for Mr. Nemser?
Yeah. Tom, can you quickly describe road closings that we can expect?
So the race starts at about 8:30 in coordination with the department, with the Massachusetts State Police, the Town of Brookline Police Department, and the Boston Police Department. Generally by about 7:45, they shut down the entire course. That gives us the opportunity to be able to start the race. They do a progressive road reopening program, so as the runners are coming out of Brookline, they will begin to open up the course. So at approximately 9 o'clock or so, they'll begin to open things up along Pond, up towards the Chestnut Street Rotary. So by the time they're exiting out from the top of Jamaica Pond, probably in that 9:30, quarter to 10 time frame, the roads will be back open.
So Pond Ave and the Riverway.
That's where we basically enter. We come into Brookline off of the Route 9 exit ramp off of the Riverway, and
Right.
we exit Brookline at the top of Jamaica Pond off of Parkman Drive.
Okay. And again, that's the morning of October 13th.
Traditional Sunday of
Right.
October of Columbus Day weekend. the
Columbus
13th
Day
of
weekend,
October.
right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay, I would also add that we do appreciate the contributions the BEA makes to Brookline from time to time with regard to marathons. And it is very reassuring to see that not only are the marathons being well-supported, but it sounds like you are having a hard time figuring out how to accommodate all the runners.
If we could take 1 million people,
Yeah.
we'd probably have 1 million people come on the 21st of April
I
this
bet,
year.
I bet.
We have increased the field size, and you'll hear more about the marathon as we get closer to that in April. We did increase the field size by 9,000, so a field of 36,000 will start on the 21st of April, nearly as big as the 100th
And I gather there'll be more charitable numbers this upcoming marathon, is that right?
The extra 9,000 is basically being accounted for by 2 groups. If you recall, there were about 5,000 runners that did not make it across the finish line when the bombs went off at 2:50 in the afternoon. They were held up. Those runners have been invited back, and the vast majority of them have elected to return. So we have about 4,000 spots that are remaining. Those are being doled out between charitable organizations, first responders, many of the people that contributed to making the day what it was, the helping people out that day.
Right.
Some of the charities are getting a double benefit, so to speak. Many of the 5,000 that were invited back were charitable runners, so many of them that have elected to come back are raising money for that same charity in addition to the numbers that the charities would be getting this year. So it should be a
Well,
good
we
year.
also know that Team Brookline is being recruited and organized as we speak.
I saw the sign right on.
Right outside.
Right
Yeah.
outside.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I thought, well, I'm really happy to hear you're offering spots to first responders
Yes.
and people. And I thought some of the most remarkable stories in April were some people who had run the marathon and then ran over to go to work at Mass General or one of the hospitals when they heard the news, so really,
There are amazing stories of inner strength. Superintendent William Evans from the Boston Police Department, having completed the marathon, came right back and spent the next 6 days on his feet dealing with the aftermath of it. And there's many of those similar stories from medical people. It shows the strength of our community. It's, we're strong.
Okay. I move that we approve a special use permit for the Boston Athletic Association Half Marathon to be held on October 13th, 2013. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye,
Thank you very
and
much.
we will see you on the 13th.
We're looking forward to that, and we'll see you in April for a presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Now we have an interview for the Commission for the Arts. Is Chris Santos here? Hi. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in joining the commission.
Of course. First of all, I've had a lifelong involvement in the arts. Since I was a little child, my mother came from a musical family and started piano lessons at the age of 6, expanded into theater, having grown up in Boston. I was a member of the Boston Children's Theater, and also took art lessons at the Museum of Fine Arts, and did a little bit in terms of videography once I got into college. And this pretty much has spread on in the sense that since living here in Brookline for the last 19 years, our children have benefited from participating in the arts, both through the schools and in the town. In fact, our son is now a professional designer. In fact, he designed his own graduation commencement tickets and was also the designer of the course catalog at BHS, as well as the student handbook. And our daughter was involved in the dance program and continued to do dance in her college years as well. I've also been very much involved on the other side of the arts in the sense of fundraising on behalf of the arts. I used to work for the Boston University College of Fine Arts, and I worked there for 8 years, and one of the grants that we obtained actually was a cultural facilities fund grant of $400,000 for the concert hall at the School of Music, and that was under my tenure as Director of Development at the CFA. And since then, I have been also working in fundraising for the MIT School of Architecture and Planning, and involved in that sense too, in terms of raising money to support the arts over there in the sense of architecture, which actually really isn't all that different from the visual arts. They just tend to use slide rules and T-squares and a lot more difficult computer programming than the visual artists at the CFA. But I am interested, though, in giving back. It would be a privilege and an honor to help the BCA. In fact, I did attend the September meeting and came back the next night to help too with grant writing workshop. This is something where I really feel very strongly about the arts, and I really feel strongly, too, that the arts need the support of everyone involved, and definitely through various arms. And one thing I'd be interested in doing is just lending my fundraising skills to the commission.
Questions for Ms. Santos?
I'll just comment, Chris, that your resume is very, very extensive, and you've certainly come to us well qualified. It seems like you've been involved in just about every college within 10 miles of here. And so I imagine you've got some pretty deep contacts in the community.
I
and
do.
Do you imagine that that could end up with some more grant money?
It could. I'm not going to make any promises at this point in time. I mean, as we know, the economy tends to fluctuate, and with that also to the philanthropic inclinations of potential donors. But the arts is something I think that I have discovered. The arts resonates with many people throughout, not only the town, but throughout greater Boston. And there are already a lot of established organizations out there that do provide grant money, and that's something that we've actually started exploring in the September meeting in terms of, finding something that actually would fund the BCA on a more regular basis, especially say, for instance, the Poet Laureate program.
Well, as you are aware, I'm sure one of the things that probably is partly caused by the economy is the funding for grants from Mass Cultural Council
Yes.
has been diminished substantially.
Yeah.
And so if there were successful private fundraising, that would help either to support other activities of the commission or the grant making, it would certainly be much appreciated. And you probably are aware that the
Yes.
commission curates the town hall walls, and
Definitely.
we very much appreciate having that changing exhibit in this room and other rooms in the building.
Right, I believe there will be a reception coming up at the beginning of October as well.
Right, right.
I'm
Okay.
actually just curious, does the Arts Commission give grants or have any involvement in music as an art? I mean, I know that they're very active in the visual arts, but,
Yeah, actually, at I believe that they did fund this past cycle. I wasn't involved in it,
right.
but I believe they funded at some time a person who used music to help convey academic principles like math and science and those kinds of things. And so that was involving music.
I can add that over time, there's a mix that includes music, but you have to understand that people must apply for a grant. And
Right.
so it may not be as well publicized that a musician could be eligible for a grant. It's a good question. Anyway,
I'm glad you mentioned the Poet Laureate program. I got a call just a couple days ago that we're looking for money to fund the stipend for that again. And if
Right.
anybody out there values that program as I do,
Right.
please contact me, and I'll see that your donation to that grant gets passed along.
And would you like to add dance to that?
We've got under control.
okay. Well, thank you very much for your interest. We're not taking a vote tonight, but you will hear from us in writing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Going to change the subject now here a bit and have the police chief, Chief O'Leary back there, come forward and talk to us and explain about this accreditation award, which I believe is a significant achievement for the department.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. But I do want to say thanks for asking us to come here, because in order to achieve accreditation, it's a long road where you depend on a lot of people. You depend upon a department that steps up in a lot of critical areas, and you depend upon a town that supports you in the process. And we were fortunate enough to have all that. And it was culminated on September 12th of this year, where myself and several of our officers, a couple who are here tonight, were asked to come to a program where they took a vote and awarded us accreditation status for the next 3 years by the Mass Police Accreditation Program. And that's the first time that the police department has been accredited. We're the 45th police department in the state. I think we're the fourth largest police department in the state to have that status from the state program. But like I said, I think I said earlier, it took us a long time to get here because what we get tested on and what standards we had to meet were not only how we operate as a police department and what standards we define our officers to hold themselves to, but we also have to depend on our equipment in the building. We were really going at it pretty good in the late 90s, and then for a really good reason, we had to stop, and that's because we got a new building. And that slowed us down a little bit, but we've really picked it up, and a number of people have really helped us, including members of the board here tonight, because on several occasions, we provided you with our policies and our procedures. We asked you to read them. As you know, they're very voluminous. You came back with suggestions, we made some changes, and it got us to the point where we got past all our assessments that we're required to do. But there's a lot of members of our department that helped as well. For example, when they came and did their assessment of our department, they would walk into a division such as training or evidence or fingerprinting and just say, give us this. And you had to have it, and you had to know what you were handing them, and you had to explain it to the assessors, and our people did that. The union was very cooperative throughout this process, which really made it a smooth transition. But in particular, I'd like to single out a couple of people that are here. Lieutenant Paul Campbell, seated there with the blue shirt. He's our current accreditation manager. He replaced Lieutenant Stephen Burke, who I think everybody knows, who did it for several years. Sergeant Jennifer Pastor, seated beside her, was, I'll probably embarrass her if I tell the story, but she was the one that gave us the kick that we needed in July, where she basically told us we had to get it done and stop whining. Seated behind her is Detective Jeff Hutnick, who's been with it since the beginning and has done a lot of work, and who couldn't be here tonight because of family commitments with Sergeant Chris Malin, who actually had Sergeant Pastor's job for about a year or so, and he volunteered to come back in June of this year, work his regular assignment and this, just to make sure that we were able to achieve it. And I don't want to leave out two of your predecessors who's really identified this as something that the police department should go after and achieve. Back in 1987, Marty Rosenthal and Jeffrey Allen authored a report, and one of the last things that the police department had to do to accomplish everything that they recommended in that report was to get accredited, and we've done that. So they really got us going in the process, and I want to just take a minute to explain the process. As you know, back in 2010, we did a minor step here, which was to get certified. That certification was good for 3 years, and then at the end of 3 years, you either re-up through certification or you move on to accreditation. Well, we were going to move on to accreditation, and we did. Accreditation, not everybody participates in it. It's really some departments that want to do it. They want to do it because it's, I think, and a lot of our members think that it's the best way to run your organization. It really challenges you because you have to meet the state-of-the-art standards. You have to train your officers well, and you have to know what you're doing, and you have to be able to open up your doors and your policies and your procedures and everything that you do to outside auditors come in and check you out. And they measure you against a lot of standards. We went through a number of phases over the last several months. One was that we had to do our own self-assessment. Then we brought in some assessors, and they did a mock on us. Each one of those steps along the way, they found things wrong that we had to correct, or things that weren't up to speed. And finally, we called in the state assessors, which is a team of 4 state assessors. They stayed with our department for 3 days, and they put us through the ringer, and they approved it. The final step was on the 12th when the commission voted to give us the status. But along the way, we met the 257 mandatory standards. We also met an additional 82 optional standards for actually a total of 339. Now, in reality, we're above that, but that's all we needed for the size of our department. And once we met that and got it approved, the assessors stopped their job. We know that we have a lot more beyond that we've done, but they didn't feel the need to go any further than that. Throughout this process, we had to keep updating our policies and procedures. We're in a real good position to guide our department as we go to the future. And when we first looked at this back in the late 90s, we were actually operating under standards that were done in 1985. So it was, since that time, we've gotten rid of that 1985 manual, and we've constantly updated it, as you know. And today, I think we've improved a lot. We've improved our accountability. We improved how we audit our offices. We've adopted the standards in all critical areas such as police management, criminal investigations, patrol procedures, accident investigations, training and technical support. I think it's safe to say that just about everything that we've done has an impact on how we do our jobs, how the town and our residents perceive us as doing our jobs, and they really do increase officer safety and the safety of the public, which I think is the reason that we're all here. I think a lot of members of the board have done a lot for us as well. I think I touched on a couple of things earlier, but I think you'll agree when you look at those standards that we asked you to read, that it covers the whole gamut of what we do for our work. And those standards that we met are really the state of the art. They're the ones that a lot of departments are striving to get. I think there's a total of over 170 Massachusetts police departments that are going for it. And we're like I said, we're the 45th out of 47 that have been accredited thus far. I don't want to go into it too much because I think you've learned about the accreditation process because that's what you do as police commissioners. But I think it's really safe to say that we're a much better department now than we were when we started this process. I think our officers know what's expected of them a lot more now than they did when we started the process. I know that our officers feel pretty good about themselves that we're accredited. I think the team will agree with me that when we sent out the email the afternoon of the 12th to tell people that we did achieve accreditation, all of us, especially the team members, got a congratulatory remark and congratulatory emails and face-to-face encounters from a lot of officers because it's something we can all be proud of, not only the department but also the town. This is good for 3 years, so we're not going to stop. We're going to continue to update our policies as we go. You're going to continue to see them as they get updated. And we're going to keep going and improve as we go. So I want to say thanks for your support throughout. And I'm sorry that we gave you a lot of stuff to read, but so didn't we. Thank you.
Well, I think we're very proud of the department. We're proud of the team who pushed to get the work done. And certainly, it actually seems to me perfectly reasonable that we should have this accreditation. I can't imagine why Brookline's Police Department would not. And I know, frankly, one of the things that's really important that this whole process has required, and I appreciate all of those policies and procedures that are this thick, but it means that there's a constant effort to be sure that we're pursuing best practices and that we are not falling into, let's say, I don't want to call it bad habits, but just falling into habits that can be improved. So I think it's an important goal for the department, but also an important process to keep everyone thinking about what can we do to be better, and it's reflected in the way the department operates. So anyway, I'm certainly very pleased and proud. Selectman Daley.
Yeah, I want to congratulate you, Chief, and everyone who worked so hard on this, because I know it was a tremendous amount of work. But I think, as Chairman DeWitt said, it forces you to re-examine your own procedures and make sure, everything is the best it can be. So it's a worthwhile endeavor. So congratulations. Thanks for all the hard work.
Selectman Bingham.
Chief, could you talk a little bit about the on-site evaluation that happened? I know that we saw all of the policies and procedures and commented on them, and there was some back and forth about that. But You indicate that the evaluators came on site and actually looked at the application of those procedures, and I'm just curious as to what happened as part of this process.
Sure. When they first came in, they each had selected an area of our department that they would look at. And one of the first things we had to do was to give certain of the assessors a tour of the station. So say that we took them to the evidence room. They come up to the evidence room and then they said, okay, this is what you're supposed to be following. Where are you keeping your weapons? Where are you keeping your drugs? Where are you keeping the money? And then you had to show them individual cases and see that they were tracked. And if the cases aren't there, you had to go to the computer and make sure that the cases that aren't there are documented in the computer, that they're either, the cases are resolved and we have the order from the court to destroy the evidence. So that's it. You go down to our training office. You go into the training office, we have all of our training records are online. All of our training records are well documented, and they will go in and they say, you're supposed to meet, everybody's supposed to be trained in CPR every year, or firearms training every year. Show us your training records. And then they'll take certain numbers out of it to make sure that we've attained all the standards. Our dispatch, it went through the same process. And the dispatch, they had to go into dispatch. There's a lot of CJIS rules, which is the Criminal Justice Information Center rules that they have to follow. They will make sure that they're following those rules as they go through it. And then after they get through their tours of the station and they're actually asking people, they then go to sit down, and they sat down and they went through standards that had to get met. Certain standards require us to do inspections every month. Inspection, every certain period of time. They would turn to one of the members of the team and says, well, where's your inspection for the month of February? So you'd have to go back and get that and you bring it in. Here it's all done. And so it was things like that that we did. It was a lot of, those 3 days were long for the assessors, but they were really long for these people, because at the end of the day, they wanted to make sure they had everything, and they stayed a lot longer, and I think a couple of them went till about midnight, but it was all worth it.
Intense is my guess, too.
Thank you.
Chief, I'll add my
Certainly don't stay.
congratulations to you and to the entire department. And you've done the town proud, and I hope that the accreditation we mentioned in all official documents from, in all public documents from now on, that you'll make it a suitable notation on your annual reports and all of your documentation. I want to ask you, we're always congratulating you on your grants that you're getting. You got 2 more today. Does accreditation help in grant applications? Is it something that they ask about when you make your grant applications?
They don't require it, but it will not hurt for us to mention the fact that we're an accredited agency.
Yeah, let's shout it from the highest rooftops.
One thing we are doing, and I want to mention, is that we're going to put all of these updated policies and procedures online. They'll be on our website over the next couple of weeks. We will be putting them up there for the public to take a look at. We will keep it up there and maintain it. It's just another step in our being a transparent department, and we think that's probably a good way to go.
Okay. Any other comments? No. Well, Chief, we appreciate not just this effort, but all of the time and thought that the members of the department have given to making this a big team success. So I know we can't thank everybody. We're certainly pleased to have the leadership of the team here, but do please take our appreciation and congratulations back to all the members of the department.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will have a little change of theme and talk about solar roofs. Mr. Cha. And members of the Solar Roof Committee, you have some colleagues with you. Talk to us about your accomplishments.
Well, good evening. I'm standing before you on behalf of Neil Wyszynski, your fellow selectman. He's traveling from out of town, and so I have the pleasure of making this presentation. This journey actually started back in, back by the warrant article 15 of the special town meeting of November of last year. And that is a warrant article that really calls out that the municipal buildings of Brookline should be assessed for solar photovoltaic installation, both during the renovations aspect as well as new construction. And they requested a set up a committee as of March of this year and complete the task by September. And this is the end of our journey. We had a very wonderful committee, Solar Assessment Committee, and they did really some very heavy lifting. We produced a checklist, and this checklist is really the consists of 4 components: site-specific, building itself, the array, and electrical components. What we have here is a document that was first developed and then was vetted by building department's project manager, Ray Masick, which really drilled very deep, okay, into the details, because ultimately he will be the Brookline practitioner overseeing these projects. And then it was vetted by my fellow building commission members on September 10th, and they have comments, and we incorporated all comments in the document. I think you have the document in front of you. I don't think it's necessary to go into any of the details, but it's like I said, it's well vetted, and at this very moment, I understand Charlie Simmons have submitted all the details of the 60 municipal buildings that we have in town to our contractor for evaluation, Broadway. And also that, I also understand that from our assistant town administrator, Melissa Jeff, that 2 of the projects, okay, well, mostly under consideration at this point, the main library roof as well as the pool for solar installation, perhaps get everything approved by the end of this year. So that's really a summary statement. I can see, oh, yes, Tommy Patola, who is the really sponsor of the warrant article, is here. And Dan Bennett, of course, one of the heavy lifters of this effort. Any questions?
Yes, Selectman Goldstein.
I do have a question, and I want to first thank the committee for excellent work and on-time work, too. There was one factor that I expected to see on the list that I didn't see on the list, and maybe I missed it, but it's shadows and sightline
Oh, yes.
impact on neighbors, not shadows affecting the
it's-
advantageousness of the solar array, but shadows caused by that might be caused by the solar array and how it would affect abutting properties.
Okay, that issue really comes under the characteristics of the solar panels, solar voltaic panels. You shouldn't have any shadows, okay? One thing you really have to be careful about are the vegetation, surrounding vegetations, as well as future, let's say future building that may cast a shadow on your array. Okay? Matter of fact, one of the buildings that's under consideration right at this moment for a roof replacement, a roof renovation, is the town garage. And when you look at, usually when you look at something, you look at it on Google Map, oh, it looks very attractive, right? And there's shadows, there's vegetation's around it. And I ran out there, and so there's no problem. You know, you trim the trees, what have you, or cut down some trees around it, until I realized, gosh, the trees are on the neighbor's property, and the neighbor's MBTA. So he said, well, pause a little bit and, you know, backstep a few steps, you know, because, you know, somebody else's trees is not going to be that easy. That obstacle is not going to be that easy to overcome. So no shadows on your arrays. That's bottom line.
But I'm talking not about the shadows that would fall on the array, but the shadows that the array itself would cause on abutting properties.
Okay.
There are some of these arrays that are built above the roof
Okay.
line and create shadows, and I kind of expected to see, and sightline impacts
Okay.
too, expected to see that to be a consideration.
Well, okay, the design's a little different today, okay? You don't have to slant the panels anymore.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yes, the one on the main library that they have submitted, okay, Broadway have submitted, okay, the design was only 10 degrees slant, 10 degrees from the roof line. So your concern of that array cause a shadow on the surrounding neighbors is no longer applicable.
I see. Thank you. That clarifies
Yeah.
it.
Selectman Benka?
Yeah, I actually, George, was surprised to hear the reference to two buildings, to the library and the pool. My understanding was, independent of this program, that there was a state program that was going forward, and I thought we were looking at 6 buildings, or about 6 buildings.
Ms.
Melissa,
Goff.
I think you're at the best to answer that question.
So we initially submitted a handful of sites as part of the MAPC Regional Solar Procurement. At the urging of the Solar Roof Study Committee, we submitted the entirety of our inventory so that in the future, this is something that we could explore. In the meantime, the state program had reached its cap of 400 megawatts, so we knew that we were kind of on hold with what we had submitted. But we got the good word just this past week that 2 of our projects are going to fit in under the old regulations and that we can move forward with those right away. So we're pretty excited about that. And that will be the library and the Korean pool.
And the other buildings are?
We'll have to wait for the new program, and once, you know, the new rules have been set, then that will determine whether or not we can move forward with some of those.
I just want to follow up, and this could be with either of you perhaps can answer, because I've recently been, for other reasons, had a conversation with someone who's knowledgeable about solar energy, and I gather that one of the difficulties right now is lack of storage. So you can build a lot of capacity, but it has to either go into the grid or there has to be storage capacity. And therefore, I'm curious to know whether you have been concerned about that at all, if that's going to be an issue.
I
No,
think Mr. Vitolo.
Well, actually, if I could just, very quickly, just from the initial reports that we've gotten from Broadway, that's not a concern for the buildings that we've submitted so
Good.
far.
Good. Okay. Other questions? Selectman Daley?
Yeah,
Well, I
these-
can also, I have solar panels, PV, on my roof, okay? And I do have to tie to N-Star. But I'm just similar to what the towns will be doing. I use a third party, okay? They're the third party. I basically use the rent-the-roof concept. But my electric bill's lower, okay? And number one, save money. And number two, my carbon footprint is much lower than before. So I'm very happy.
Okay. Other comments? Selectman Daley?
Yeah, no, I have a question for Melissa. On the 2 roofs we're talking about, we're not, this was the concept he just mentioned, the rent-a-roof, where you, this is not that kind of program. This is one where we get all the benefit from putting the solar panels on there. Is it?
We're exploring an arrangement where we would be leasing the roof space. A third party would own and be responsible for maintaining, and then we would buy the energy.
Okay. And I assume you've crunched the numbers as to whether that works better than getting our own solar panels and getting the full use of them.
Our goal is to make sure that the rate that we negotiate with the third party would be either the same or lower than what we currently pay for electricity.
Okay, and if that third party like goes out of business or something like that, what happens then?
So we currently have town council reviewing the contract that we will be engaging with the third party, and we would hope that there'd be contingencies for something like that.
Okay.
Successors and assigns. Any other questions for Mr. Cha or Ms. Goff?
Thank you.
Well, I second the comments earlier about having a good report and on time. And I'm pleased that we have our entire group of public facilities undergoing assessment. So as the opportunities arise, there may in fact be more installations. So, but this is very helpful. And I think we should thank Mr. Vitolo for setting it off in the first place and the committee for coming back with the checklist. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item, Horace James Circle Rotary traffic pattern, which has changed recently.
Well, let me,
Selectman Benka?
yeah, let me just say that I had asked that this be on the agenda so that we could discuss what's happened and the thinking behind it and what the options might be going forward. In part from some personal experience and in part because of communications that I received about the impact of the new traffic pattern. So.
All right, can we just simply, while the images are being set up, make this sort of preliminary fact statement? This was done by the state because the Rotary is under the control of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the decision-making around this location, I gather, was DCR and Mass DOT, Department of Transportation. This pattern was not either imagined, conceived of, or installed by the town. That does not mean that it's not good. It just simply means the town was not the originator of this decision. I gather we would have been consulted in the process, and perhaps we'll find out more about that. But this is a state project. Commissioner Papasturgeon, you
Thank
have
you.
the floor and the microphone.
Thank you. I appreciate that you allowing us some time for us to have a discussion about this. It has been a hot topic in the last few weeks, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how this has come to be. But I want to preface my remarks by just saying to you, normally I come before you defending our own projects, and this is a little bit unusual for me to come before you to defend someone else's projects. So I'm going to try not to just defend it, but to explain it and explain the why of it. But you are absolutely correct. Horace James Circle is owned, operated, and maintained by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, as well as 2 of the 5 roads that lead in and out of the Rotary, the Hammond Pond Parkway and the West Roxbury Parkway. And just in terms of orientation, of course, this is the circle in the middle. Where north is up here. This is the Hammond Pond Parkway coming into the Rotary. This is Newton Street, LaGrange Street. This is also the other piece of Newton Street because Newton Street flows through. And this is the West Roxbury Parkway that comes into the Rotary. And then, of course, Hammond Street is here. The town's municipal garage is up here, and Fire Station 6 is over here. Back in 2004, the town of Brookline had asked our consultant, VHB, to develop some conceptual short and long-term improvement designs for 3 intersections in South Brookline. One of them was this particular intersection even though it was not ours, we realized that there were some serious safety concerns with the traffic flow at Horace James Circle. Most of the conceptual designs for short and long-term improvements involved pavement markings, and those would have been done according to the 2003 Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which you all know is the Bible for traffic control devices throughout the country. These concept designs were passed on to DCR as the owner of the roadway for comment, and we had hoped back then that DCR would look favorably upon actually implementing the changes, the safety changes back then. Along comes the Chestnut Hill Square project in Newton, and as part of their mitigation package for the city of Newton, the town of Brookline, Mass DOT, and DCR, they agreed to fund and construct improvements at the Horace James Circle, and to do it per DCR specifications and Mass DOT designs and specifications. While DCR does own the road and maintains the road, I believe they are bound through the Mass State Highway Standards to make sure that all their designs conform to Mass DOT standards. Mass DOT and the Department of Conservation and Recreation requested that the consultant for the developer, a company called Vanass and Associates, not the same as VHB, develop pavement markings that meet the 2009 federal MUTCD standards, which had now changed from the 2003 standards. And also, it should be of note that in 2012, Massachusetts amended the MUTCD standards to bring them more in line with the international standards for roundabouts, and adopted those as an amendment to the federal MUTCD standards. So what you see there right now is what the Commonwealth of Massachusetts adopted in 2012 as an amendment to the 2009 federal MUTCD standards for roundabouts, which also conforms with international standards for roundabouts. So if you were to travel abroad, you'd see similar markings and similar designs on rotaries and roundabouts. The plans were drawn up, approved, and permitted by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the improvements were constructed by the contractor hired by the Chestnut Hill Square developer. And just to note that the land, of course, is still owned, operated, and maintained under the jurisdiction of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Now, I'm going to ask Todd Corain, who is our Transportation Administrator, to just come up and take you through the mechanics of this roundabout, we now call it, to show you how the traffic is supposed to flow around it. And then after that, we can address some of the concerns about the traffic backups that were present at the beginning. I will tell you that I've been personally going through this rotary every morning at 7:30, just to gain my own flavor of what's going on there, and there were some severe traffic backups, I think, at the beginning. I came through there this morning at 7:30, and I normally come through from the Newton Street egress, which is here, and I was able to come through. There was very little backup here, and get into this rotary and exit onto Hammond Street without even stopping this morning at 7:30. Granted, there were some backups that I did notice as I went by on the West Broxbury Parkway, and as far as I could see, it was backed up to about where the golf course entrance is, but I really couldn't see beyond that. So I'm going to ask Todd to just show you, take you through the mechanics of the rotary, and at that point...
Before you do that, can I just ask another question? I don't know whether it's related or not, but I do know that there's also been other work going on between the rotary and Route 9, where there's been lane shifts. Is that also connected to the backups that are happening at Horace James?
I will tell you from personal experience that the work that's going on Route 9 has created horrendous backups in the entire area of South Brookline. And I think a lot of the increase in congestion is in fact due to the increased traffic on the side roads that are trying to get off Route 9, which is just totally clogged. There is some work going on at the intersection of Hammond Pond Parkway and Heath Street that's part of this work. and that has contributed by nature of lane closures. But it's not really affecting, I don't think, the traffic coming into the Rotary from say, the West Roxbury Parkway, LaGrange Street, or Newton Street. I think that's where the biggest tie-up was.
Okay, thank you.
Todd Crane, Transportation Administrator for the town of Brookline. I'm just going to try to, let me just orient this. Okay, it does work. Explain the different pavement markings that you see in the federal standard for the roundabouts, which were added to the Mass amended MUTCD and are actually based on international standards. What you see as you approach, on each approach, this is Newton Street, you see these guide arrow pavement markings on each approach as the driver enters in and approaches the roundabout. And they're meant to orient the driver based on where he wishes to exit the roundabout. So I'll just take you through sort of my route in the morning is actually Newton Street, same as the commissioners. So as I approach Newton Street, there are 2 lanes that are now legally allowed to enter Newton Street into the roundabout. Before, this was only painted as 1 lane. It's now 2 lanes officially. If you're on the right lane, what this is meant to do is you see the quick arrow here, unfortunately this is rather small, or the straight. So if you're in the right lane, ideally it's for those cars that are coming in and either turning onto LaGrange or coming in, entering this lane and exiting out on continuing on Newton Street. Now you do see here that the solid line does turn to a dash line. That's because some cars entering here might want to continue on this way. So the dash lines make it legally allowed for them to change lanes and continue on. Once they get to this point, if they want to go to Hammond Street, they would continue on here and exit. Or if they want to go all the way around, they continue on here to Hammond Pond Parkway. The left lane coming off of Newton Street, you'll see that it has the rotary and then the arrow that goes all the way around, because ideally people coming in here are going to come in and go all the way around and either exit Hammond Street or all the way to Hammond Pond Parkway. Now LaGrange, you notice, does not have any of these. The reason why is because it's only 1 lane that enters. So all vehicles entering this 1 lane are either going to make the immediate right onto Newton Street, or they're going to continue on to this 1 lane and continue on to one of the others. For West Roxbury Parkway, which is up here, you see the guidelines, the guide arrows down here. If you approach within this lane, this lane is meant to either continue on to Hammond Street or to continue on here to Hammond Pond Parkway. Now again, in recognition that some cars might get stuck in this outer lane but want to continue on to Newton or LaGrange, again, they can make the transfer here to continue on to Newton or to LaGrange, or all the way over onto Newton Street if they want to go all the way around the rotary. Same thing on the left lane coming off of West Roxbury Parkway. They approach here, they can come on, make this movement directly onto and off of to Hammond Pond Parkway, or around to Newton Street, or all the way around to the others. And you see the same thing on Hammond Street and on Hammond Pond Parkway. So essentially, these lines in here provide direction for the vehicles as they enter and get into the proper lane markings in terms of where they're going to exit. That's how the roundabout is meant to include and increase safety, in the studies that show from the Federal Highway Administration and many other groups that looked at this for a 10-year period, that these types of pavement markings versus the old rotary pavement markings actually increase safety. And the town first started looking at this in 2004 based on accident history.
Where have these markings been tested that would contribute to those results, or how have people measured the success of these markings?
What they've done is they've looked at the old style rotary pavement markings. They've looked at accident history over a certain amount of years, and then they implemented these pavement markings and compared it in the same location. And what they've shown is a decrease in those studies.
So there are places where over the 10-year period, there are actual examples of the new markings?
They've been studying these actually since the 1980s, the Federal Highway Administration and other traffic-related groups. And in order for something to get added to the MUTCD, It's actually a very long process. You have to go, there's studies that are released or allowed by the Federal Highway Administration. Those studies are documented, then they get sent to what's called the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And depending on what kind, and there's many different committees that deal with different aspects. And they study it again for several years and perform their own tests. And then they get sent to one committee that votes on whether they would add it to the MUTCD. The MUTCD is only released every certain amount of years. There was a 2009 version. Before that, it was a 2003 version. So between 2003 and 2009, all the changes that were considered were looked at again between those 6 years, voted upon, and then added. So it's not something that it suddenly gets added overnight or within 2 to 3 years.
I just want to be clear in my own mind that I understand. In Massachusetts, there are rotaries where these markings have been implemented and have been in effect over the last 10 years.
Not Massachusetts, no. These were just added.
MUTCD is a Massachusetts manual?
No, it's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices that's released by the federal government.
Oh, this is the federal standards
Correct.
we're talking about. All right,
Correct.
so how many
What-
rotaries in Massachusetts have these markings?
I do not know.
How about none except this one?
I don't know that. I can't say that for certain. What I do know is that in 2012, there's a certain amount of time from the federal government releases the MUTCD that a state has to accept it and make changes based on what that state wants.
So we're
So
probably.
in 2012, Mass DOT did release what's called the Mass Amended MUTCD, which included these pavement markings.
All right, so the state accepted the federal standards, but has not tested in Massachusetts, where in fact there are probably more rotaries than any other part of the country, or the New England for sure.
There are the old style rotaries.
That's right.
That will be,
That's right.
according to Mass
Where
DOT.
everyone has learned how to go around them and not run into each other, by and large.
Well, again, according to Mass DOT, this is now going to be the standard that all of these are being converted to.
Okay, but nobody has tested this set of marking in Massachusetts. That's my question. I want to be absolutely clear. Has this been tested in
I do
Massachusetts?
not know. That would be a question for Mass DOT.
I can give you the answer to that.
Okay.
I know for a fact that there are several rotaries under control in Mass DOT that have been constructed with these markings. One of them happens to be at the intersection of Route 93 and Route 110 in the town of Methuen.
Okay.
It's been like that probably for 2 years because I frequent that area quite a lot. And I know that when they did these type of markings there, that was a very busy intersection that had a huge amount of traffic accidents. It was extremely confusing at the beginning, I admit, because as I went through there, I found it confusing the first few times. But after that, the markings began to make sense and began to position you in the lane that you needed to be in to safely travel around that rotary.
Andy,
So I know of at least one specifically, and I'm sure that as Mass DOT has converted their own rotaries to roundabouts with these types of lane markings, that's what's been done.
Andy, if that's been in place for a couple of years, and if the federal standards were 2012,
No, the federal standards were 2009.
and the 20
Massachusetts adopted them in 2012.
So
I
that would probably mean, I mean, if we adopted them and if this has been in place for a couple of years, it probably predated the standards that went in place in Massachusetts in 2012.
I'm sure that rotary was marked in Methuen probably just prior to Massachusetts adopting the amendment, probably as a trial or a pilot.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't know for sure, I don't work for MassDOT, but I would think that that's what they would have done.
Todd, can I ask two things about this plan that confound me, even though they've been explained to me? The first is, I don't understand why it would be advantageous to basically turn it into one lane over at the West Roxbury Parkway section of it. To me, that's 90% of the problem we've been hearing about. Why would you take what works well as 2 lanes and suddenly constrict it down to 1 lane?
The reason that was converted, the 2 lanes coming through the rotary in this location, it was converted down to 1 lane. You can see the hash marks were put here. Was previously, the 2 lanes coming into the rotary were creating congestion for the cars trying to enter the rotary. You see there's 2 lanes trying to enter the rotary at West Roxbury Parkway. This lane of traffic was always in interference with this outside lane of traffic in the rotary. And if you check the police reports, I think you'll find that there was a lot of accidents at that point.
So-
That was part of the safety improvements to funnel this into one lane so that you would allow better flow from the West Roxbury Parkway into the rotary itself.
But Andy, you have 2 lanes here, 2 lanes coming in here off of Hammond Street. You have 2 lanes here, 2 lanes here, coming off of Hammond Pond Parkway.
But we didn't have the issues there, probably because of the site. We didn't have the issues, I shouldn't say we. The state didn't have the issues there that they apparently had here, which is why they narrowed the road down to 1 lane in that rotary.
Look, I mean.
You also notice that there are hash marks that were put in over here on the side, because before, there was always been 2 lanes coming in from the West Roxbury Parkway, except during the Ryder Cup when a 3rd lane was built there, but hasn't existed since then. The hash marks were put there because what you were getting was an illegal 3rd lane that was trying to squeeze
Yeah,
out
again,
of the
why don't, I mean,
corner over there.
all the other improvements, except for one that I'll mention in a second, all seem logical and worth a try, but, and will improve safety. Why don't they see if those other improvements improve the safety problem? And then if there's still a problem, try necking down, turning into 1 lane. Taking a rotary, which granted, it's not the most efficient way of getting people through intersections. The option is, lights and rectangular right angle intersections, but that, we don't necessarily want that either. But there's an inherent problem in taking what's 2 lanes all the way through and forcing it down to 1 lane. The other problem, before I let other people speak, is this idea when you're coming northbound on Newton Street, that you've got an arrow that seems to indicate, what's that?
Got a pointer?
Yeah, thank you. This right here, this, my first time through here.
Yeah, right.
It sure looked like I could go
Left.
clockwise around the rotary. It's so
You
counterintuitive.
You didn't see the circle in the middle of the arrow. You didn't see
Yeah,
it.
I'm sorry, I've been driving a long time, and I see an arrow that takes me left. I think that's somehow the directions have been changed in a very dramatic and unsafe manner, and I'm not the only one, I'm sure.
Let me give you my take on this, having driven through it and gotten stuck in it. Actually, I got an email from Janice Kahn about markings on rotaries in Europe, and actually I just came back from a couple of weeks, and they are laned when you enter in Europe, but one of the I think really efficient markings is one that allows people who are, for example, coming from Hammond Street to get out onto Hammond Pond Parkway without really entering the rotary. There's essentially an exit lane that lets you skirt the rotary traffic. You don't really compete with the rotary traffic and don't have that interaction with the rotary traffic. That, I think, makes it a lot safer, and it certainly expedites traffic flow. What we've done here, or what the state has done here, by bulbing out the traffic coming from the West Roxbury Parkway and trying to get onto Hammond Street, you've really eliminated that exit, that ability to get onto Hammond Street without competing with the rotary traffic. And to my mind, one of the causes of all of the backup on the West Roxbury Parkway, or I gather it might even be called Newton Street there. I don't know.
It's not.
It's the West Roxbury Parkway. It is this bulb out that essentially makes it impossible, if you observe it, to get onto Hammond Street without necking down into this 2 lanes. And I think some of the most serious backups have been along this stretch of the the West Roxbury Parkway. The other thing that, to me, just came across as utterly counterintuitive was the fact that coming off of Hammond Street into the Rotary, traffic that's going to go in 3 different directions is necked down into 1 lane, and traffic in the left-hand lane coming, there's only 1 exit that's designed for traffic in the left-hand lane. So essentially, 3/4 of the traffic, or at least 3 out of the 4 exits, are being forced, if you take this stuff seriously, are being forced into 1 lane, and only 1/4 of the exits are in the left-hand lane. To give directions to people may make sense, but the way that that this has been done, basically taking away lanes, as Selectman Goldstein noted, and taking away this ability to get over to Hammond Street, and essentially forcing. I suppose one reason these roundabouts are safer is because you don't have any cars in them, because everybody's waiting to get into them. I'd be curious as to whether, when they were studying the safety, they also studied the traffic flow and the delay for people to get into them.
Did they? I mean, that's a great question. Do these new designs and new design parameters take into account the flow of traffic and the efficiency of the design?
I can't speak for the MassDOT engineers that designed this, Selectman Goldstein. All I can tell you is that when they design things of this nature, they keep in mind the accident history, they factor in the safety, vehicular flow, speed. There's all sorts of things that are factored into these designs. And, I'm not going to put myself in a position of speaking on their behalf. I had no part, nor did any of us have any part in this design. This was based on their standards, and it was constructed based on their standards. At this point, I'm not quite sure what, if anything, the town of Brookline can do about this. We can certainly have a dialogue with MassDOT and DCR, and we can talk about some things like, reinstating perhaps this, it's 2 lanes coming down. You're actually creating a 3rd lane in this area here. As far as egressing from Hammond Street to the Hammond Pond Parkway, nothing's really changed there. You can be in this lane and scoot right back out. There's really nothing that's changed there. We can talk to them about that. One other change that should be noted is that there used to be a stop sign here. I believe that's now a yield. The stop sign was removed here, and this is now a yield on LaGrange Street, which was designed to allow the traffic to flow better there.
Police department used to set up a trap waiting for people to
Well,
roll that
LaGrange
stop
Street was
sign.
always backed up, at least beyond Beverly Road, at certain times. So I'm not sure what direction the board wants us to take, or where you want us to go with this. Our powers and our authority are extremely limited as to what we can do here.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, well, I have 2 things. One, I think Selectman Goldstein's point was very important. If I saw those arrows that kind of look straight and then make a left turn, I would think they were telling me to go the wrong way around that rotary. And yes, maybe we're not quite European enough, but I wouldn't get it. And I think that's something we need to bring up with them. But what I'm going to suggest, do you think it's possible for us to set up some kind of video equipment or something and get some actual visual data as to what is going on there, and then we can perhaps talk with them with some actual footage of where the problems are?
I believe that they've probably done that on their own already. MassDOT and DCR are well aware of the issues here. There's been some of the folks that travel through there have been in contact with MassDOT and DCR. I know that the state police have been up there at least on 2 or 3 occasions, making note of the congestion there. And I'm not sure whether or not DCR has thrown it back to the designer or not, but I know there was some talk of that. I'm not quite sure what we can do with.
Well, I mean, if there is visual footage, let's do a FOIA request and get it and see what it looks like. So when we talk to them, we can talk with some knowledge.
And I would observe that if this is really the first example in the Commonwealth since this thing has been adopted, somebody somewhere should have made an effort to do outreach and explain what these symbols mean. They're incomprehensible to people. They are, in fact, so confusing that when I went around it, somebody nearly drove into me. I was where I was supposed to be, and that other person was confused. So my own feeling is that when you choose to radically change not just the signage and the street marking, but in fact try to substantially change people's behavior without any notice whatsoever, you're not going to have much success. And I believe that's what we've got, not much success. And it's not our fault. But I do believe they owe the town and the folks who drive through there a better job of educating, a better job of explaining, and maybe even some public response to how they have evaluated this and what, if any, observations they have. Tell us what their accident statistics were before this and what they have become since. Is it safer? Do we really know? I feel that this has been a very poor communication experience, if not poorly implemented change.
Yeah, they came to us for noise bylaw relief permits
Right.
to do all this. Would have been nice for them to
Show us.
to mention to us that they were going to change this around so dramatically. And I'll add that you'd have to be a cryptographer to understand that little circle on the arrow represents the big circle.
If people were really trying to read the symbols and understand them, which they don't, they would run into a car in front of them because they would not be keeping their eyes where they should be, which is looking out for traffic.
Well, as far as I know, that hasn't happened in the 2 weeks.
Well, I'd like to think so, but I will tell you, my own personal experience was freaking.
Well, Betsy, I don't think we should be yelling at Andy because he didn't do
not.
it. But I think
But I do think
communicate-
we should talk to the Mass DOT about it.
I will communicate the board's concerns to MassDOT and to DCR in the strongest terms that I can use. I can't guarantee anything. I mean, it would be, I don't know what we're going to get in return, but I will communicate the issues to them and see what comes of it.
I think you have some members of the public that wanted to comment.
Well, we may allow very brief comments, but I have to tell you, we still have other things that we need to do tonight, so unless you're adding new information, I don't believe we're going to give you much time. Go ahead.
I personally was...
Stop. You must identify
I am
yourself.
Carolyn Shore. I live at 76 South Street in Brookline. I go through that rotary every single day. It's taken me 15 minutes easily to get through there. I have pictures that I've sent to everybody. I want to emphasize what you all have said. I was freaked out the first time I went through there when I saw that I could go the wrong way around the rotary. I came down what I call Newton Street, and it told me that I could go left to LaGrange Street. And I said, I'm getting out of here before somebody kills me, because that is totally wrong. Also, the safety issue is the backup that this causes. This backup goes from the rotary to Route 1 and beyond. It took a friend of mine who lives on Hackensack Road, which is close to Route 1, an hour to get from there to the rotary. It should take 5 minutes, 10 minutes max. And there's a real safety issue when you can't get through the streets. You couldn't have emergency vehicles go through. And I want to, you know, that I am under the understanding from talking with DOT on the state level and DCR on the state level, that this was done by a permit to the NES, as you said. DOT asked for the signs to be put in. DCR pretty much said yes. DCR also said they can change things. So I don't think it's the situation that can't be changed. Ellen Fitzpatrick at DCR is the name of the person that I was talking with. So if you want to, I would feel free to contact her. Thank you.
You know, the good, just a quick comment while the next person is coming up. The good thing is it's just pavement markings and there weren't physical changes made to the roadway, so.
I mean, there's a real bottleneck because they've taken away the road and that we come down. and they've taken away part of the rotary. Also, I want to say another thing. This was never explained to anybody. Nobody had any idea what the signs meant. So nobody in the area knew what the signs meant. People are trying to abide by signs that they don't even understand. Thank you.
Hi, Janice Kahn, County Meeting Member from Precinct 15 and a 30-year resident of this area, Craftsland Road area. So first I want to thank Selectman Banka for putting this on the agenda. And the fact that we need a tutorial to understand this rotary is not a good omen for this particular roundabout. And my comment, which goes a little bit broader, is that this is part of a larger picture. You know, this is all being sort of driven by Chestnut Hill Square, but there have been many, many signage changes and arrows put in on Hammond Pond Parkway and signs that it takes so long to read and understand that it's creating a lot of hazards, I feel, for the neighborhood. My kids who grew up on the street don't know how to drive in the neighborhood anymore. And I don't know, there's a traffic light that was put up without an arrow where cars shoot heading south. They shoot across 3 lanes of traffic now to go back onto Route 9 East. And it's just mind-boggling what's being done, all the contortions that are being done in order to accommodate the thousands of cars that are anticipated on coming into this area. And so that I hope that when you have a conversation, if you have a conversation on the rotary, that you also have a conversation on the larger picture, because this is a piece of the puzzle, it's not the whole puzzle. Thank you.
Michael Berger, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 15, 112 Walcott Road. And I think I'd like to applaud the selectmen for their analysis, cryptically and otherwise. I agree with all of your observations. I would just want to make one comment in that where we have standard rules for rotaries, the question is, do we have a standard rotary? In other words, all rotaries are not the same. And this one is particularly unique. It's worked fairly well for many, many years. And I think that if we apply just a blank rule for rotaries to something special, we'll end up with something very special and perhaps not so good. I would also like to echo Janice's suggestion that we look at the bigger picture. And perhaps there could be a task force or a committee to be involved in all the projects that are ongoing in South Brookline that have to do with the increased development in Newton and other locations, because they impact so much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Lazar. I live on Craftsland Road. I won't repeat much of what's been said. I agree with it. I am very glad that this wasn't the town of Brookline's doing, because it's a disaster. The two things I would say is, before coming over here, I went back to the circle at 6:40, that's usually after rush hour, just to take a look at it again. And the traffic heading south from on Hammond Pond Parkway from Heath Street down to the circle was backed up about a quarter of a mile. It was halfway between Heath Street and the circle. That's at a time when there isn't usually traffic. It usually sails through there. The markings are very close to the entry to the rotary, which means that people come upon it, they essentially stop, they're confused by it, and people are suddenly trying to change lanes because they don't know, they're in the wrong lane. It's a disaster, I think. The final thing I would say is that at that sort of chevron, the place where Newton Street curves off and around the circle, people coming out of LaGrange trying to go around the circle have to squeeze into the inner lane. And I think that what I've observed in situations like that is people go over the markings and they create a lane for themselves. And it's most prominent if you're familiar with the old Route 1, now VFW Parkway, down near Costco. The traffic is going along and suddenly there's a left turn lane to get into Costco. and there's a bulb out, yellow striped line that comes out pushes you out into the third lane from the left. And if you do that, if you follow those instructions and then pull back in to make your turn, people shoot down on the left-hand side and cross that bulb out, and you really have to be very careful because cars come down pretty fast. So that's another piece of this that seems very dangerous. So thank you for your interest.
Okay, any other comments? Well, I believe the certainly intention of this board is to have some conversation with Mass DOT to understand how this situation can either be mitigated or what we can do to at least help people get better information about how these markings are meant to be followed. It seems to me minimally before having installed them, there should have been some opportunity to explain what they mean, because I know that contributes to the confusion. And I guess there would be something else helpful, and that is this whole interconnected set of changes that are taking place. It might be helpful if Mass DOT would be able to give us at least a timetable so that we know if, for example, the further out improvements are part of what's causing the backup. Because I'm, in my mind, clearly separating two things here. One is the change of markings, which has clearly caused a huge amount of confusion and possibly some risks. And the other distant road work that's being done on arteries that feed through the circle that may also be contributing to the backup, which is a separate matter and might, when the other work is completed, not be such a significant impact. So it seems to me we have two big issues here.
Although I think we heard that there was a big backup on LaGrange Street
Right.
coming from Route
Right,
1 in,
right.
which
You
should
wouldn't
not
think.
be affected
Right.
by any
Right.
of that other work that's going on. So that just says that the changes to the rotary alone are creating confusion, backups, et cetera.
Right. And for whatever it's worth, although I've been watching it on my iPad, the red marks have turned to yellow, and so apparently now it is not stopped at the circle, but slowly moving through. The traffic is moving slowly. Okay, moving on.
I do think those arrows, though, that seem to indicate you can go the wrong way around the rotary, Andy, I would suggest that I think that's an emergency. I would read that arrow to say, I'm supposed to go the wrong way.
It doesn't even add any information. It's like,
Yeah, and so that, I think, has to be dealt with soon before you get people,
If
you're
that
going to
arrow-
get some people going the wrong way.
If that arrow were straight and not curved, it
Yeah.
would have the exact same information as
Yeah,
that
yeah.
left.
Can I just add one thing? I know I said it before, but the other emergency thing from my point of view is there is a safety issue now, where we used to be able to get in a car and drive someplace or have emergency medical people come through. We can't do that anymore because of the backlog. That is a real serious issue.
Okay.
Horace James himself would have wanted it this way.
Right.
Who was Horace James? Is anybody?
Not a
Not a
clue.
traffic engineer.
All right, well, now we're going to move on to another traffic-related, so to speak, issue, the taxi medallion program and an update. So who's going to talk to us about that? Mr. Corain?
Close this. Just looking for. Sorry, our consultant's in the hallway, so I just want to bring him in.
Sure.
Richard LaCapra. Again, Todd Corain, Transportation Administrator for the town of Brookline. This issue was last before you, I believe, in early April of 2013. This is the Phase 1 conversion of the taxi medallion report. We are seeking a vote from the Board of Selectmen authorizing us to move ahead with the plan that was presented by our consultant. and then modified by the Town Administrator's Taxi Medallion Working Group in consultation with the owners of the companies. Just to quickly review the plan, it calls for 3 tiers. We currently have 185 licenses, and it calls to convert those to taxi medallions. There are 3 tiers within this conversion. It begins by a 17% give back of surrendering of taxi licenses to the town from the companies. The companies then have their remaining licenses, and then those are divided up into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 licenses are converted to medallions and given to the company at the time for a $1,000 administrative fee. Due upon sale by the company, whether it's 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, is $40,000 per medallion, or in the case that is assigned to a wheelchair accessible vehicle, $30,000 per medallion. The Tier 2 allotment is converted to medallions and given to the companies. The price for that is $65,000, and again, that is due upon sale by the company or within 3 years, whichever comes first. The Tier 3 medallions are actually priced at market rate, and the way that we establish the market rate is in between the in between the tier releases. We will auction off a portion of our medallions to establish the market rate, and that market rate will then be charged to the companies that choose to exercise those Tier 3 medallions at that market rate price due at the time of sale from the town to the company. Based on our consultants' figures, which were looked at by a notable financial institution whose principal has 30 years' experience in taxi medallion leasing within the greater Boston and greater New York market, the estimated Tier 1 administrative fee would lead to $46,000. The Tier 1 sale of non-wheelchair accessible vehicles will lead to a little bit over $1.5 million. The Tier 1 sale of wheelchair accessible vehicles will be $210,000. The Tier 2 sale will be $4,485,000. The Tier 3 sale will result in $4,750,000, and the town-owned sale of our medallions would result in $4 million for the town. Just to go over, now you may remember that in between the consultant releasing his report and us coming to you in April, the Transportation Board approved and recommended that we move forward on this as well. At that time, they asked that the town administrators working group meet with the industry and try to make the plan more more mutually beneficial, address the concerns that were expressed by the company, and just to give you some idea on what's different from the consultant's report to what we're recommending, which is the amended. There was a reduction in the give back amount from the town from 37 medallions to 32 medallions. And this was meant to allow the companies to better capitalize on the Tier 1. There was an increase in Tier 1 medallions from 37 to 46 to allow the companies to better capitalize and afford the Tier 2 and Tier 3 purchases, as well as update their fleet. There was an increase in the Tier 2 medallions to provide more price stability and predictability to the existing owners as they finance their purchases. There was a decrease in the Tier 3 medallions to provide more stability and continuity of services for the existing owners and to reduce the amount that they had to pay at the market rate. There was also a reduction in the Tier 1 price for the expected 7 wheelchair accessible taxi cabs by $10,000, which will help the taxi owners meet its requirements under ADA, considering the cost difference compared to a non-wheelchair accessible vehicle. There was a reduction in the Tier 2 price from $70,000 to $65,000. And we're allowing the Tier 2 price to be due upon sale by the company or within 3 years, whichever comes first, instead of due immediately upon sale. So those are concessions that the town has already made to the owners on this plan. There were several questions, the second part of your memo were several questions that came out of that April meeting that we had addressed, and I believe the memo was a week or two ago sent to you. If you have any further questions, Richard LaCapra is here. He is the town's consultant on this to answer any further questions you may have.
Selectman Daley?
I did have a question. I think it's on, it's in the question 3 of that memo, and it's about the fact that single owners get charged more than multiple owners. And I didn't really quite understand the rationale for that. It seems like single owners would be, less able to pay the higher rate.
You're referring, I presume, to the average price.
Yes,
And
I guess so.
there is a small difference that comes about from the fact that very small owners may have only 1 or 2 medallions or 1 or 2 licenses that are being converted. And a question addresses this and says to have the tiers where someone is converting licenses in 3 tiers and a great number in each, the average price for that arrangement really can't be determined to the same exactness of someone having 2, say 1 in tier 1 and 1 in tier 3. So there is a small difference. The prices actually, when they were developed to minimize the standard deviation among the average prices. And this was the smaller of the potential price ranges that we set. And they deviated a little bit further with the reduction in tier 2. The question is addressed as a possible variation of the current plan, that if this is a concern, it is a fairly easily rectifiable concern in that there could be a small discount given to license owners below a certain size. Because the ultimate amount of revenue that we'll be speaking about is relatively small, so that, as see in the last part of the response to this question, that if that perceived inequity was deemed to be great enough, then a slight reduction could be done without any material alteration of the plan.
I guess what I'm perplexed about is, and the answer to this question, it says, the single owners are at the higher end, and if the town wishes to close the difference between the average cost and the single medallion cost, it can offer a discount of a few $1,000s on the tier 2 medallions to single owners. So wouldn't the single owners, if they just have 1, wouldn't they be in tier 1?
If they are single owners and had only 1, they would likely be in tier 2. Because as a single owner in tier 1, they would essentially be receiving the medallion at net 0 cost.
Okay.
So if the average were some $60,000 or so per medallion for each owner, then we'd be singling out a group that would essentially have a group of 0 cost medallions.
Selectman Benka?
Yeah, I actually, if you could go, Mr. LaCapra, to the last page with the town modifications. I am concerned not only about the issue that Selectman Daley raised, which I think can be addressed, as you indicated, by discounting the tier 2 cost for, there are only 4 medallions, 4 owners with 1 medallion each. I'm also concerned about what happens to the 3 companies that have only 3 medallions at this time. And for the larger companies, you're requiring a 17% give back to the town. For these 3 companies with 3 medallions, ADI, Hazira, and Modern Ride, you're effectively requiring a 33% give back to the town, essentially double the give back, because they're ending up with only 2 out of 3 medallions. And you know, obviously, if you only have 3, it's hard to cut that baby into a lot of pieces. But I think that you could argue either they should keep the 3 medallions, or at the minimum, I think that you could argue that they should have a Tier 1 medallion and a Tier 2 medallion, rather than a Tier 1 and a Tier 3. I think you're really nicking them 2 ways here. You're taking away a third of their medallions as opposed to 17% for the bigger players, and then you're putting the second medallion into the most expensive tier. So I would have some concerns about that.
Okay, again, I think these are reasonable suggestions to the extent that there is a perceived inequity here. Now, the Tier 3 medallion is most likely to be the most expensive medallion, and basically moving it to a Tier 2 would lower the price, although not alter the give back. Conversely, a non-give back, if they were to retain all 3, would give them 3 rather than 2, but it would raise the price.
Right, well, you could have a 1, 1, and 1.
That's correct, and that
one
would
in
raise
each
the
tier.
price.
Yeah, the average price, exactly.
Right, the average price being in the 60s.
So, and I don't have a strong feeling about that, but I think you've sort of picked the worst of all worlds here in having a 33% give back as opposed to a 17% give back, or in the case of the smallest operators, no give back. These 3 operators who fall in the middle here are clearly giving back more than anybody else, and then they are getting charged what is, I think theoretically, the highest price for one of those 2 that they're being allowed to keep. So that's my comment. Then I have a question. One of the issues here is wheelchair accessible vehicles, and I know that you've, Todd, built in a discount for those vehicles, which I think is an entirely appropriate way to recognize the additional cost of those vehicles. At the Commission for the Disabled, we've discussed dispatch for the vehicles and ensuring that those vehicles are available, are on the street, and are dispatched regardless of which company somebody who needs that sort of vehicle might call. And I'm wondering where that's going. I know Cambridge has a common dispatch for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and I'm wondering what we're planning to do in our regulations.
Yeah, that's outside of this. In terms of the regulations,
Right.
Right now, there's a working group made up of town staff as well as members of the Transportation Board that are drafting the proposed regulations that will be brought to the Transportation Board. And this is one of the remaining issues that they're looking at. There's sort of 2 models out there. One is the Cambridge model, where one dispatch is used to dispatch all wheelchair accessible vehicles regardless of what company they belong to. The other is the Boston model, which is each company dispatches its own wheelchair accessible vehicles. However, if one of them is not available, they're responsible to contact another dispatch. Right now, essentially what we'd be doing is talking to the owners of the dispatch and the companies to see if they believe the Cambridge model would be more effective, or they'd be willing to cooperate on it. You know, the Cambridge model really requires a certain amount of cooperation between the companies, or whether the Boston model would be better. But the regulation group that's looking at that is looking into which model would best be for Brookline. If I can just go back to the other point that yourself and Selectman Daley raised, essentially, in terms of where these number of medallions lie within the Tier 1, the Tier 2, and the Tier 3, does not change in terms of how the plan operates. And it really is, the legislation was built so that the Board of Selectmen has ultimate control. So if you feel that there's an inequity and you wish to, I will just note that Hazira is actually no longer in business.
Okay.
Their license, their license, due to serious safety violations over a 2-year period, was not renewed by the Transportation Board. So they are actually backed out of this.
Okay.
However, for ADI or Modern Ride, if you wanted to not factor theirs into the give back and put them into a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 or a Tier 3, that does not change the plan in terms of us moving forward. It's up to you guys in terms of the numbers in each one. So that can easily be done if you decide tonight that you're going to vote, but you want the plan to recognize that, let's say for ADI, there was no give back and they had a Tier 1, a Tier 2, and a Tier 3. And for Modern, there was no give back and there was a Tier 1, a Tier 2, and a Tier 3.
Or there was a 1 give back and a Tier 1 and a Tier 2.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I think that's
Yep.
the sort of middle ground, but.
Well, I want you to appreciate too, though, that, you balance this, apparent inequity a little bit too. That you're, by giving a Tier 1 medallion, you're essentially giving a $70,000 windfall to each Tier 1 medallion. Those are going to be resaleable predictably at $125,000. It'll be a $40,000 payment due at that point. So, you're talking about a $70,000 windfall at that point.
Right,
gift.
and I don't think that either Selectman Daley or I were suggesting increasing the Tier 1, but I think you were thinking about the pricing of the other tier, and I also didn't suggest that additional Tier 1s be given, but that rather than being a Tier 3, it'd be a Tier 2, which would provide some relief.
That's sort of my point, is, Todd explained, yeah, that's completely doable. I don't know if relief is really the, call for, in that we've been pretty generous in giving them Tier 1 medallions for $1,000 that are gonna be worth, $40,000, I suppose you could argue, but they're gonna be worth a lot more than that.
Wait a minute, but the single owners are down in Tier
Well,
2. so
I'm
they're
talking about the 3 owners right now, so the
Okay.
single
Yeah,
owners are.
and
are a different story.
those 3 owners are each getting about a third, exactly 1/3 of their medallions are going to be Tier 1, and the benchmark for the larger companies is 31%. So that's, to me, pretty equitable. They're not getting, those small companies are not getting a benefit that the larger companies are not getting in terms of the offering of Tier 1 medallions to them. It's, what concerns me really is the amount of the give back that they're expected to do, and then where the other medallion falls. Assuming they are expected to give back a third of their medallions, charging them the highest price for that second medallion, I think, is troublesome.
Well, I have a different question, and I worry a bit about the unlicensed and unregulated aspect of the competition that seems to be developing. I mean, there is Uber, but who knows how many other such, I don't even know what to call them, methods of hiring a vehicle are going to appear over the next several years. We certainly are aware of I have great concerns about unregulated, unlicensed people doing transportation. So I'm very much in favor of anybody who takes a stranger into their vehicle and transport them somewhere should be regulated and licensed. But having said that, it appears that we may not have the authority to regulate. We don't know yet. And in the meantime, if we go through this transition, while these alternative means of transportation are available and unregulated, that seems to me that it is it throws uncertainty into the marketplace in a way that I don't understand how you can possibly assess or evaluate.
That's a good point and obvious issue that needs to be addressed. And I think fundamentally, the first point you make, we should look to regulate wherever we can this type of service. There is certainly a public safety issue, and to the extent we're able to regulate, that certainly should be the first response. Secondly, there is an emerging technology, but the industry does go through these various kinds of changes, and the emerging technologies should be the province of the existing companies as well. They should have the apps. They should I would certainly encourage them to pursue the same kind of technology. This technology, there are several generations that will be coming about over the next year or two that would make it more generally available and less threatening. This is not yet, even in places where things like Uber and Halo are highly developed and being used, this has not had a material dent, made a material dent in the average pricing of medallions. Using New York and Boston both as examples, this has not caused any depression in the cost of medallions. And if I may circle back to Councilor's concern on the 3 medallion and 5 medallion issue, I believe of the 2 proposals that were made to drop the give back or to put the medallions in Tier 1 and Tier 2, I think for reasons of equity, it would appear to be better to drop the medallion give back than to move the medallion that is now in Tier 3 into Tier 2. If we were to do that, move the medallion currently in Tier 3 into Tier 2, it would have them paying approximately half what the average of all other drivers are paying, which would seem to create an inequity.
If you drop the give back, you would have, what, 1 in Tier?
One, and one, I would presume.
1 and
sir.
1.
Yes.
31, I mean, that's probably as close as you can come to 31%, 44%, and 25%.
With 3, yes, sir. And I think that would probably be preferable and certainly would have no material effect on the strategy of the transition.
I have one final sort of well, it's not unrelated, but what is the effect of the experience in Boston of abuse of medallions with the operators being required to either pay or, in effect, be indentured to the medallion owners, the drivers, as opposed to the owners of the medallions, having to operate as if they're indentured to the medallion owners?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
There have been abuses in Boston which you must be aware of.
Yes.
Okay, well then talk about that, whatever you don't understand about my question.
I believe we're talking about the expose that was done by the Boston Globe that
Yes.
sort of exposed the problems within the Boston system. And within the regulatory working group, we've been discussing this as well. And we've been discussing this with the police department, Officer Canny, our contacts over in Boston. And quite frankly, from what we look at it as, is not necessarily a fatal flaw in the medallion system. It's actually a fatal flaw in how the regulations were actually enforced. Boston's regulations are one of the toughest in the nation if you actually look at the requirements on paper. Unfortunately, what you had was a long-serving, good sort of, good friend, good buddy, look the other way network that occurred over, 30 years that were looking the other way when medallion owners were abusing the drivers, when they were forcing them to buy gas from the owner of the company instead of the cheapest gas station, when they were forcing them to pay the dispatcher in order to get calls instead of requiring equal treatment within that. So what we plan on doing, we have not seen those types of abuses within our system, and we plan to have a very strong regulatory hand. You remember that this plan actually calls for the creation of a full-time Hackney officer over at the Brookline Police Department, as well as a new regulatory person within the Transportation Division to monitor and work with the system and to make sure that it's following to the letter of the law. So these improvements are already starting to be enforced. We already have a driver education program. We already are responsive to drivers if they're reporting concerns with the owners in terms of not getting cabs or not making payments, and vice versa with the owners and the drivers, that we're already starting to take sort of a more hands-on approach. And we plan to continue on that so you don't see within Brookline what happened in Boston.
And to a larger point, too, I mean, and this is Mr. LaCapra's theory all along, by awarding medallions, creating the ability to capitalize this industry, you're going to create an industry that can afford to be regulated, and that we as a town will be able to afford to properly regulate, too, as a result of various revenue streams that we've built in, too. So I think those concerns, and in fact the concern about unlicensed cabs as well, by creating a capitalizable asset here, you're going to avoid, not encourage those problems.
I hope so.
We hope so. That's right.
Okay, any other questions from members of the board? I do see that there are some operators present. Is there anyone who wants to make a comment at this time? Yes? Come forward and identify yourself, please.
Good evening. My name is Amid Al-Kouri. I'm the general manager of Eagle Cab. We do business as Hello Taxi Transportation. I'm in favor of Mr. LaCapra's plan. However, I feel in the past year, a lot have changed. And part of it is what you had mentioned regarding other services, Uber and other companies that are unregulated, taking jobs, even taking drivers, because drivers can go and get a car without having to make a lease payment and make a living. So having said that, these numbers that the 40,000 in Tier 1 and 60,000 or 65,000 in Tier 2 and the market price in Tier 3 are all valid if the evaluation of Mr. LaCapra that the auction price of this medallion will go to 125,000. However, if this medallion don't reach that number, we will not be able to afford to pay for Tier 1 or Tier 2. So that's the only concern I've had. I had mentioned this, I think, in email I've sent to Todd, to Mr. LaCapra in the past, and I've been saying this all along. We don't have problem paying for these things if these numbers actually reach the estimate that Mr. LaCapra had given, that they will reach 125,000 or more. So my suggestion that these numbers should be based on what the medallion gets in the auction. So it should be a percentage of what the price is in the auction. So if the medallion gets 125,000, and we think it's fair that Tier 1 is 40,000, that's fine. But if the medallion gets 70,000 in the auction, the 40,000 should not be in place. I don't know if this makes sense, or
It makes sense, but my response to you is, you know the industry even better than we do. And in any business venture, there's an element of risk, and you're responsible for evaluating that risk and deciding whether that price is warranted, and you'll be able to do that even better than we will. But that's my response on that.
I'm not sure if that was if I understand your response. I was not involved in evaluating these prices.
Right, but you will, when you decide whether you're going to exercise your options at Tier 2 and Tier 3, you'll have the benefit of the market, your experience in this industry. You'll be able to decide whether the price is warranted or not. Right now, we've got every indication that it is warranted. My own, judgment is that it is from just word on the street. I think people are anxious to have the opportunity to own a medallion in this town.
Well, I surely.
As they have been in Boston and New York and all the other
Right.
communities that have this
I
program.
surely hope you're right, and if you're right, I'm in a huge favor in this. As Mr. LaCapra can tell you that I've been very responsive and very involved in this. However, if the medallion sells for $50,000 at the auction and Tier 2 costs $60,000, where does that put me?
Right.
And that's the concern that I have. I'm not objecting anything, I'm just, I'm worried.
What will the sequence be in terms of timing? When will the
question.
existing operators have to make their decision about whether I mean, the Tier 1 is a no-brainer, that's $1,000, and it's only the $40,000 fee on resale. Will there be an auction price will there have been an auction of any of the Tier 3 prior to the companies having to exercise their option with regard to the Tier 2?
Yes,
Okay.
essential to the plan, the owners will know the market price for at least a couple of years before they need to exercise the option.
Okay. Does that respond to your concern? I mean, if they're going at auction for $50,000, then you would buy at auction rather than exercising a $65,000 Tier 2.
Using that extreme example, if we were to have an auction, let me use a hypothetical extreme example, that they sell for $40,000. Nobody will exercise their Tier 2 or Tier 3. They'll go back into auction and
Sure.
they'll bid $35,000 for them.
Sure.
That would be the chaos in the market. That's all I have to say, I'm not gonna say anything.
I don't think it would lead to chaos in the market, and that's another point that I think we need to make here. We're not going to be abandoning our current licensing system while we implement the medallion system. This will be phased in. Taxis will continue to operate under the current license structure until such time as each stage of the medallion sale takes place. So from a consumer point of view, there's not going to be any chaos. This will be a very smooth transition.
Okay, the question before us is to approve the conversion plan. Are we satisfied that this is a plan that we're ready to approve, or does it require additional modification before we take a vote?
I still have a couple of questions about, on the two remaining owners who have three, if you drop the give back and give them one in each category, you've kind of solved that problem.
Right.
The single owners, this gentleman raises a good point. They have nothing until they get to Tier 2, and if that turns out to be larger than the ultimate auction price.
But they have nothing right now. They're licensees. They don't have a property right. By all estimates, they will be making a windfall based on purchasing at $60,000.
Okay, but so explain to me again, how long can they continue operating as licensees? At what point do you say to them, you have to exercise your Tier 2 option or you're out of business?
3 years.
I mean, the
They
exact
have
timing
3
will-
years to option the Tier 2.
And there will have been some auction
There will-
sales
yeah, there
before
will-
then, so
there-
they
we
will be
would have
able to...
already established the market rate through our auction of a certain percentage.
Okay.
Can I just make one suggestion? Todd, can you walk through, or Richard, can you just walk through the timing, because it might be helpful? Like how many months apart over the...
Yeah, it would be
period?
actually really good. I missed not having a timetable here for these
Yes,
steps.
there is a timetable in the report, which we can refer to, but essentially, If the program is planned and approved and planned to proceed as currently structured, there would be the awarding of Tier 1. Simultaneously, the give back will be structured as an auction. So the timing is that if it takes 3 months to structure the tiers, create the Tier 1 medallions, give the Tier 1 medallions, and approximately 6 months to go from the auction of the first group of Tier 3, presuming we have 32, we will determine and presumably get approval for the number, which I would use as a round number, probably 20, 2 auctions of maybe 20 and 15, or 2 18s, or something like this. That would begin immediately. So we would have first the award of Tier 1, which would be in approximately 3 months to work out the details. Approximately 6 months after that, we would have completed the first auction. So we're looking at about 9 months to have the first auction complete. The elections would not be required for essentially 27 months after that at the latest. So what we would do, the report suggests that the option period now be given a certain amount of time measured from the end of the first auction. So in case for some reason that the auction is delayed a year, say, to use an outlandish example, well, that would push out the auction, the option period for 1 year. So essential to the plan is that we want the market price up and known as soon as possible. And the conversion plan calls for knowing the market price of a Brookline medallion within 9 months of approval.
And the operators who now have a single license would continue to they'd be able to operate under that license until the time that they had to make the decision for the Tier 2 option?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so if I followed that, if we were to approve this tonight, then the first action, so to speak, would be in January 2014?
Approximately January of 2014 would be a reasonable time for the first set of Tier 1, and we would be looking for the first auction sometime in early summer of 2014.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to suggest then that if we do the 2 remaining 3 cab license holders with no give back and a 1-1-1, Tier 1, 2, and 3, and the single owners who only get something in Tier 2 are given a $2,000 discount each, since they're getting nothing under Tier 1 and are paying a higher.
They're getting $60,000. You know, you haven't heard the single cab owners here coming to the stand and complaining that it's not fair. If I was a single cab owner right now,
Okay,
I'd be pretty happy about the
Okay, I'm
current
looking
system.
at this chart, and it says they're paying $70,000.
Actually, it's 65, but it is
60.
somewhat, it's the last
The
column.
original.
65, they're paying $65,000 for something that's
That everybody else pays $63,000.
likely to be worth, well, no, that's the average price. I mean, they're,
Okay.
they're paying more on an average basis, but everybody's paying the same amount for their Tier 2 medallions. So I don't, look, we're splitting hairs in some respects here, but I don't think that it's added equity is really necessary here. I think this is a very fair proposal, as is, without the elimination of the 1 medallion give back for the 3 cab owners, and without making any further adjustment for the 1 cab owners. It's fair, it's approximately the same. The consultant has worked hard to get it into a situation where it all is as close as mathematically it can get. And I don't think that we need to split those equitable hairs any further. But if that's the will of the board, I'll go with it, but I don't think it's necessary.
Well, it just seems to me, I mean, some people are getting a very good deal because they're getting tier one things, and, you know, it just seems to me like these single owners are being disadvantaged
I
here.
think, you know, to give a discount of $2,000 to the single owners, that would bring them into line with the rough average of the others. You know, it's, you're right.
Like I said, it's
It's
splitting
splitting
hairs. I don't
hairs.
mind doing it, but.
It's splitting hairs. I think it's more symbolic
Okay.
than anything else.
All right.
Well, I'm going to make that motion.
All right, I'm not even clear what motion you're making. I heard the $2,000, but are you approving the plan with,
The two amendments.
okay?
Approving the plan
let's-
with two
let's-
amendments.
Let's get some motion language.
Okay, the two amendments are that for the two remaining three license holders, that they not have to do a one give back of a license. Instead,
Well,
they would have options in
actually,
one in tier one, one in tier.
Before we move that, I want to figure out what the cost of that is. I mean, what does that do to the average
You know, folks,
price?
I do
It-
not
it
think this
actually,
is something I want us to do on the fly. I would prefer, if you're going to have an amendment, it needs to be calculated what the impact of the amendment is. I don't think we have the
Well,
answer
it's
to
a-
that right now.
I mean, I can tell you,
It's
it's
easy.
$180,000 difference in gross to the town, and I'm not sure what it does to the average prices.
Actually, the average price of those, there'd be one at 1,000, one at 65,000, and one at 125,000. Total of 191,000, average of a little over 63,000. And that, I think, is why Mr. LaCapra said that would bring it more in line with the other prices.
Right, but the cost to the town is, we've
The cost-
we've foregone about $180,000.
The cost of the town is that we have foregone the sale of essentially two licenses at 65,000 because they did not get a tier two. So that would be we would have foregone 130,000. On the other hand, because his zero has gone out of business, we're getting their
Oh,
three
yeah,
licenses.
I forgot about his zero, okay.
And that is going to bring us more than that amount in three licenses
Yep,
that we're going to be
realize
auctioning
At the
off.
market rate, yep.
So,
Okay. I'll go with it.
okay, so it is you want to do the bottom line?
What, you go ahead.
Okay. The holders of three current licenses will have one tier one and the option of one tier two and one tier three. The holders of one license will each have one tier two with a $2,000 discount, so their price would be $63,000. And other than that, it would be as proposed.
Okay, satisfied?
Yep.
Kate, are you clear about that? This is one where I think we're going to read carefully how the minutes are recorded to be sure that there is no misunderstanding, because this is complicated. But I'm not going to try to repeat. We have a motion before us, and I will move it, or I say, Selectman Daley has proposed an amendment, has moved an amendment to the plan which Selectman Benka has explained. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And I hope you understand what we just did.
I did, I made it on my notes.
Good.
Thank you for
Good.
all your work on this.
Thank you,
Right.
and thank you, Mr. Malacapa,
Appreciate it.
too. Appreciate it.
Okay, next item is warrant articles, tobacco control, tidying up. Mr. Vitolo.
Yeah.
Hello.
I have a question.
Can I state my name for the record first?
Please.
Hold your question. My name is Tommy Vitola, 153 University Road. Now
Does
it's your
this
show.
warrant article seek any change in Brookline's tobacco control policy?
Well, I don't think Selectman Goldstein wants to dance around the issue one bit.
But maybe Dr. Balsam would, so.
All right.
So.
Given
right,
that
so-
it's a good idea to clean these things up.
And this
go
one is
ahead.
particularly full of all sorts of cruft. So the long and short of it is Article 8.23 is the town's tobacco control bylaw, and it is chock full of regulations which are no longer compliant with state law, which explain how we will transition to a smoke-free workplace, to smoke-free restaurants, to smoke-free taxi cabs. We're there, and so we can remove lots of the old stuff. We can also take the opportunity to make our town laws compliant with state minimum fines for certain infractions. I became aware of some of these problems a few years ago when I proposed a bylaw prohibiting the sale of tobacco products in medical institutions and educational institutions. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to come back and clean it up. I will tell you that I didn't get it exactly right. I don't know yet what how the dust will settle. I've sent an email to the moderator to find out what possible changes can be made. There's a gentleman named DJ Wilson who works for the Massachusetts Municipal Association as their tobacco control guru. And he's pointed out that there are a few places in the warrant article I proposed where I did not raise the fine up to the state minimum, and where the town bylaw allowed for some latitude that state bylaw doesn't allow in giving fines. For example, knowingly commit the infraction versus just simply committing the infraction. The state doesn't allow the knowingly wiggle room that our town bylaw does. And so we would remove the knowingly because, well, the state law is the law and it is the policy as we enforce it. I'll also say that there's some changes which we're actually working through right now regarding membership associations. At the time that I cleaned up this warrant article, it was my understanding that membership associations in Brookline were permitted to allow smoking when the general public was not in the room, so to speak. Turns out we don't. And so that's something that I just discovered tonight and will communicate with the moderator on to determine if we can pull that back out. The intention is to get this right, and we've got some opportunity to do so. We've got advisory subcommittee, we've got, I'm going to get it wrong, the ACPH, and we're going to get it right. The intention is clean up the regulations, no change in policy, and I'm sure that over the next month, provided that the moderator allows all of the changes we'd like, we'll get there. I'm not interested in changing any policy at this time, so if we're stuck in a spot where we can't get this through town meeting without a change in policy, we'll just pull it.
Yeah,
Selectman Baker.
yeah, the membership association may be a scope of the warrant issue.
Well,
Possibly. I mean,
right, I
not-
mean,
Not to resolve here.
if we strike it and go back to the status quo,
Then you haven't really accomplished what you want to accomplish in cleaning this up. But
well, remember, the membership association stuff isn't in the current bylaw,
Right.
right? So if I remove it and we continue to not allow in membership associations, that would be compliant with state law. So like I said, we've got to work out the details.
Right.
The one question that I have is you struck, and this is something you can look at as you go through this process. You struck the definition of food service establishment.
That's another one that DJ pointed out. He said, you may want to bring that back, since after all, you refer to it later.
Yeah, right. Good.
May I suggest, and perhaps Selectman Benka, you can tell me whether I'm correct or not, but it sounds to me as the substance of the changes that are being proposed are ones we would support, but there are some technical issues that still need to be resolved, right? Okay, well, I'm going to say thank you very much, Mr. Fratello. There are a few other bylaws that you might want to review.
Well, One at a time, we'll do them one at a time.
Okay, all right, because I'm sure, I mean, well, we do know that there are other ones that are out of date, but it astonished me how much of this one was out of date.
And I would add that I
I'm
think
impressed.
it's important to clean it up because in the next year or 2 or 3, we are going to see, I believe, some substantive proposals for policy change as they relate to electronic cigarettes.
Yes,
Flavored
exactly.
tobacco, all these other things.
Right.
So giving a nice clean slate will allow us to have that policy discussion, and an important
As new
one
products arrive, right.
So
when the time comes.
leads to my question, at least for the time being, which is, given that there's so much of this that's being scrapped, is there no sort of model bylaw that we could, really and truly scrap the whole thing and come up with something brand new that works and
Well,
and has been time tested?
I think that the current model law is the state law, right? But the state law allows for more restriction. The state law is sort of the floor. So for example, for hotel rooms, the town could say there's no smoking allowed in any hotel room. We don't actually say that. That's something we might want to
We
say.
say
in the
they
future.
have to restrict some rooms.
That's right, that's right. Most rooms, in fact.
Most, right.
But we don't say all rooms, and state law doesn't require you to say all rooms, but you could. My understanding, and I hope Dr. Balsam will comment on this, is that a number of communities in the Boston metropolitan area are working together to sort of look at what we'll call, early 21st century policy and figure out what they want to do with perhaps hotel rooms, certainly electronic cigarettes and things like that. And we may see in the next few years a number of communities harmonizing their policy. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, and I'd welcome further questions regarding that for Dr. Balsam.
There are questions from members of the board? Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I just have to ask you, it says, there's a section that talks about no employer can require any employee to accept a designated smoking position.
That's right.
What is what the heck is that?
Well, for example, if you clean hotel rooms for a living,
Yeah.
and you need to enter the room of someone who's in a smoking room, they could be smoking in the room, and now you're in that room. So you're a employee who interacts with, shall we say, the smoking public. That's one example. There aren't many examples. but
Well,
that is
I
one.
would suggest, because I read this and I thought, somebody has a job where they're sitting there smoking? I think that maybe position in I don't know if you can make this change, but that working in a smoke environment or something might better get across what you're trying to say.
Sure, or what was actually already in the policy. I'm happy to talk about that detail with you, probably offline is easier to make sure we get the
Okay,
language right. and-
okay.
Absolutely.
And what are the knowingly, I don't know whether this is clearly it's, the bylaw becomes more restrictive if you take the knowingly out.
Except that state law doesn't allow for that knowingly.
To be in there anyway. So-
Excuse, shall we say.
So then
in
they-
practice, it doesn't change our policy at all.
Yeah. And what are the fines the state fines that are higher than ours?
Oh, you put me on the spot. If we go to the back, let's see here, 8.23.6, A, that fine, for example, is, I believe, $100 instead of $50. And there are some fines that escalate, that begin at $100, but then the second and third fines become $200 and $300
Under state law again.
under state law.
Yeah.
And I'd add that actually in today's Globe, at least the online version, Boston just recently voted to double the city fines. So Boston is going the route of substantially higher fines, but this would
I don't think.
codify the state minimums in our bylaws.
I don't think the moderator would let you go beyond, but I think he might allow the state
So-
minimums, because that's really the law.
We'll see.
Okay, all right.
Dr. Balsam, do you have any comments or thoughts on this?
We are going to have a hearing, the Advisory Council on Public Health, in a couple of weeks, and those hearings will inform the department's position, but I can say that we support the idea of cleaning up the language. There are a few technical issues here that I'm hopeful that the moderator will allow for these changes to take place, because I think it's good to clean up this language, but on the other hand, we don't want to go against what we've already been doing or go against state law. So hopefully Dr. Vitolo can, can go through that process successfully.
All right, well, certainly, I think he's indicated his intention to resolve as many of these issues as possible.
Good.
Other questions?
Yeah, just one quick question. If you go to the violations and penalties section, I'm just curious about what D means. There's C and D. C is any entity violating any other provision of this bylaw, any other section shall receive a fine of $300. And then it says employees who violate any provision of section 8.23.2C shall be punished by a fine of not more than $100 per day for each day of such violation. And 8.23.2C is the definition of tobacco vending machine.
Yeah, so DJ Wilson pointed this one out as well. And as you can see, since it's not underlined or struck, that is the original language. That's an error or something that needs cleaning that I didn't catch the first time around, so.
But I mean, lurking behind that is also a policy question, I guess, of what was that intended to apply to, and what is the distinction between any other entity and then something focusing on employees. And I mean, I'm wondering what the genesis was of that reference.
Yeah, that's a good question. Interestingly enough, there's actually an addition of a single word that was a really important word and absolutely left out of the bylaw. That's similar in that if you look at where am I? I am in. This is so long. About the 7th page back. It's a number of paragraphs. The numbering is 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Yep.
Under number 5, you see I added the word before because that word wasn't there.
Right.
And that's a really important word for that clause. I don't know why it wasn't there. I don't know if the original bylaw failed to include it or if it's a Scrivener's error.
Right.
So we're trying to catch all of them. I encourage you to find what you can and let me know, and we'll correct whatever I missed to the best that we can.
Oh, I totally commend this effort, and I hope everything that can be corrected will be identified, and that the moderator is going to treat them, I hope, as within the scope. If the overall scope was to update and make the bylaw both accurate and reflect the intention that we have, which is to be compliant with state and other regulations. So, good luck, Mr. Vitolo.
Thank you.
Dr. Vitolo.
And I presume you'll hold the vote at a later.
We're not going to vote it until you get your dots crossed and your I's, whatever you want to do to them. But yes, of course. What I'm saying here is, you clearly are having to deal with some very picky details, some of which are clearly policy-driven, and others may just simply be errors that were in the original bylaw, and I don't think we want to take a position until you bring us back a version that you believe is substantially fair and accurate.
My hope is, in fact, that by the time you guys vote on this, you will have heard from other groups as well who have looked at this and said, we think
Sure.
that this gets the job done with no change in policy.
Right, more eyes is good here. Okay, good, then.
I just have one quick question for Dr. Balsam on, and obviously not for this effort, but the electronic cigarettes that one of you mentioned, they actually have nicotine in them, do they not?
Oh, yes, they're a nicotine delivery device.
So they're not benign.
Well,
What is benign? The question is, you know, how do they stack up versus cigarettes? And I think there's there's a lot of different aspects to it, but I will say this about electronic cigarettes. I think they have been found useful by smokers to help them wean themselves off tobacco. And I'd certainly want to see somebody using an electronic cigarette rather than smoking cigarettes which have tar and all kinds of carcinogens in them. We don't
Right.
know whether electronic cigarettes are safe. They've not been tested, so that's still out there.
I
We
just
do
think in terms of our regulations concerning young people having access, that we would
we'd want to restrict that at some point, for
Make them go
sure.
get their prescription for marijuana instead.
I will say that it's come up at least once already where someone who owns a business in town has asked me what our view is on smoking of or using electronic cigarettes within a food service operation, and I said no, we don't want that.
so
And
we
they've
may
agreed.
need a better definition.
Well, there's many things that you know, you have the thing at the high school where the students are working on moving back where people can smoke. You have the flavored cigars situation that they're catering to young people. So as Dr. Vitola said, we need to get all of our stakeholders together and kind of go over all of these issues. And we'll be doing that in the next couple of years, I think, and we'll be dealing with some of these issues independently.
Okay.
Hopefully, the electronic cigarettes are solar powered too, which leads us to the next warrant article, right?
Okay.
May I say something? I'm Ruth Ann Snyder, 30 Perry Street, and I think I'm after the person that's speaking at your next warrant article, but I need to leave here this evening by 10:10. I'm sorry, I was scheduled at 8:30, so I thought it would be reasonable. I need to pick someone up at the airport that's coming in from Europe.
So would you like us to take your item
Yeah.
now?
Can
I
just-
think we could
Can I
probably.
just say before we do that, this was a public hearing, and I wondered if there was anyone else that had wanted to speak on the last one before we move on. I don't think so, but.
Don't see anybody. Okay, if you would like us to take up your warrant article next.
And I apologize for the shortness of time.
I read that.
So I'm Ruth Ann Snyder, town meeting member, precinct 6, and Article 15 is about good governance. It asks you to require that the building commissioner adopt a prudent policy of specifying in all rulings and decisions relating to condominium common areas a date by which any action required pursuant to such a decision must be taken. Article 15 is rooted in the belief that decisions by the building commissioner relating to condominium common areas are of equal importance to all members of an association whose enjoyment of their property and sometimes the monetary value of that property are affected by the outcome. Requiring a date certain for enforcement of such decisions assures the equal rights of all parties to a timely resolution and the justice inherent in that decision. Requiring a date certain for the enforcement of such decisions is good governance.
Okay, questions, comments from members of the board?
Yeah, I want to hear from the building commissioner on
Well,
this.
we can certainly invite the commissioner up, but do you want to ask Ms. Snyder anything?
I'll ask Ms. Snyder, I mean, and I think I know the answer to this already because we've talked about it, but maybe it would help if you'd explain to the board the specific incident that this is arising out of.
Oh, thank you for asking that. So I have, which I'll give you, is an email that I sent to the moderator. And I said to him that I thought that maybe I didn't have my facts right. Does staircases, anyway, and so this is what he wrote back to me, and I'll give it to you when I'm done. It says, your article applies generally to all condominium common areas and is not site-specific. That you may have mistakenly described in your explanation The situation that compelled you to submit the article has no bearing on the scope of the article itself. And then he goes on to say other things which I can read to you. Shall I? Or is that enough?
I don't think.
It says,
Ruth Ann,
"My
would-
guess is that any attempt by you to correct the facts in the explanation is like to create more confusion than clarity. If you feel compelled to make such a correction, you can submit a new explanation for inclusion in the combined report for which the deadline is noon
Right,
Thursday,
but
November 4th.
my point, Ruth Ann, is that your warrant article taken alone as standalone, I don't think anyone kind of appreciates why it's necessary.
well, I
with
plan
it.
to make a
It
very-
seems so specific in its scope, and you're reacting to a very specific occurrence that you don't want to see repeated. And maybe if you just, for illustration purposes, show how the failure to have a date by which action is required, what the effects of that can be.
Well, I'm not prepared to do that for you this evening. I have to convince town meeting to request that of you, and I'll do that at that time, and I'm sorry that I'm not prepared to do that. I have to say, I took comfort in knowing that you are already very well aware of this situation. This has been before you, this particular incident from which I draw my conclusions has been before you before. And I actually have asked the moderator, but I just sent it to him today. I'm not sure what I should actually say, whether I just say this situation or I name it very specifically. I'm not sure about that.
Well, I think, Ruth Ann, the explanation says that there was an illegal apartment. I mean, without giving an address, that there was an illegal apartment and new construction, and the building commissioner ordered it dismantled, but didn't set a date for that. And I gather that it remains in place because there was no date for that dismantling to occur.
Yes.
And I gather that is the source of this warrant article.
That is the source of my warrant article, but intertwined in this is what is common property and what is private property, what is zoning and what is permitting. And they kind of knotted together, and I have to I have to sort them out in a way that that it's understandable.
Well, the way that the article is written, as Selectman Goldstein indicated, it is very narrow. It refers just to common areas, and that would assume, it could be common areas of a condominium or common areas of an apartment, but it just refers to common areas and doesn't refer to other.
In condominiums, doesn't it say that?
But it doesn't say that.
No,
It doesn't say that?
I mean,
Oh, no.
I'll just
No.
say something. This happened during the warrant opening, right at noon closing. So the petitioners filed it, and as filed, the word was missing, but town council and moderator strongly suggested putting the word in. So,
Well, putting in the word condominium.
Condominium is the
Yes.
word you're saying.
Would be within the scope.
it's already in there. In the warrant that you signed,
Oh,
it was in there.
it's not in the version we are looking at.
No, because as filed, it was not in there, but the moderator
Ah,
and town council
Okay, all right.
basically instructed.
Because I certainly was going to ask about that.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Does that help?
well,
So
that,
does it say relating to condominium, common areas?
Yeah.
condominium, common
Okay.
areas?
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
not site-specific.
warrant.
It applies to all of them.
I'm sorry?
Okay.
It's not site-specific to
Sure.
this particular incident, which is why the moderator is saying that my explanation,
Okay.
So Ruth Ann,
Can I just suggest that it's a good idea for us to have the current version in front of us? and-
Just again, to explain, that's what was filed. So the only other, what you signed as a warrant includes that word, but that's what was filed, and upon advice of the moderator and town council, the word was inserted for the warrant that you signed.
So that is the current version?
Yes, in the warrant, but documents like that have all the signatures and the date stamps and all that, there does not exist one
Okay.
that has the word condominium in it.
Okay, all right.
Well, it is, as you recognize, it doesn't just apply to the one location, but
No.
it does apply only
To
to
common
orders,
areas.
to rulings with respect to condominium common areas. And it-
Absolutely.
And it wouldn't apply to, for example, a house being built.
No, not
Without
at
a
all.
building
Not at
permit.
all, not at all.
But why wouldn't it? That was my next
Because
question.
it's just specifically for
That was her
condominiums.
concern.
So
Just
why wouldn't we
specifically.
want the building commissioner to always specify a date by which an action is required
Right.
in every situation?
In every ruling,
And-
not
and
just-
doesn't, and further, I mean, isn't this really about one particular instance where the ball was dropped, and do we really need a warrant article to correct it?
Well, this one incident was very insightful in helping me and others to understand how the process unfolds. And this seems to be a, I don't want to know the word pitfall, I'm not sure exactly, but this seems to be a slippery slope that should really be leveled out. This is something that has great influence on people's lives, and it shouldn't be repeated. So
Yeah.
it's a lesson specific to one site, but it should apply to all condominium common areas.
Well, I mean, it actually, I'd love to hear from the building commissioner, but it may be that this is a good idea and it should be applied even more broadly.
Right. I
Perhaps.
think what we're
So-
saying is it's so limiting that it has very restricted application, whereas it would be possibly desirable for all decisions and rulings to have a date certain by which
I think you're
They
right.
should be
I think you're right. I'm
implemented.
sorry, I didn't think about it. If you can expand it by all means.
I don't think we
No, I
can,
don't
that's
think
the
we have.
problem.
One more question is, so we make, let's say this is adopted and the Board of Selectmen require this of the building commissioner. I mean, what happens if the ball gets dropped and that fails to happen again? Is there, there's no penalty or
No
a
consequence.
consequence to it?
It's
I mean,
just- it's a resolution.
it doesn't really prevent the same occurrence from happening again.
Well, again, I'm only bringing this to your attention. I'm expecting that greater minds, more familiar with the subject, will fill in the blanks as you're bringing up. I think
I
it's
mean,
an
it's-
important area that we need to talk about, and I can only bring you, like I once said to you, Betsy, there are 28 daycare centers. I don't know all the full
Yeah,
ramifications.
It's like saying we should have an article that says nobody should make a mistake. And,
Right.
you know, and that doesn't prevent mistakes from being made.
Well, in my, there are a lot of things that came to my attention as I followed this case along, and there are lots of suggestions, that I would like to bring to someone's attention at some time, but I just thought this was the place to start, so I'm glad it's on the table, and I would welcome any, future conversation or support to making things happen.
So could we invite the commissioner to give us his thoughts on this matter?
Good evening. I understand Ms. Snyder's warrant article and her desire to protect, condominium owners throughout the town of Brookline. But currently, there is a policy in place, and if there is a violation, whether it be building code or zoning bylaw, when we do issue an order or a notice, there is a 30-day time frame that we put in that order letter to comply with either the building code and/or the zoning bylaw. So this policy is essentially already in place, and it's, the order letters are standard. Town council has reviewed them in the past by my predecessor. They're the same types of order letters I've used in the past in other enforcement action. In this specific case, there was a permit issued, there were inspections done, and a certificate of occupancy was issued by my predecessor. I was then asked to revisit and look at this situation, and in my opinion, I felt that there was no violation, zoning or building code. So I did not issue a date certain because there's no violation. If there was a violation, I would have issued a letter, either zoning or building code, giving the applicant or the property owner 30 days to comply. Failure to comply results in a court action, and we file across the street, and the process kicks in from there. This is more of a disagreement between my determination and Ms. Snyder's opinion of, what happened at a specific property. If a party or a person is aggrieved by a decision that I make, there's an appeal process that they can take, whether it be building code or zoning bylaw. So at that point, there would have been a 20-day appeal period under zoning bylaw, a 30-day appeal period under the building code, that if she was unhappy, that they could have afforded that route and gone that avenue. But just to reiterate, currently, we do issue order letters, notices, and any types of violation that provides a 30-day time frame for compliance. So at this point, I would be opposed to the warrant article as written. And
what you're saying is that there is a 30-day period in all orders.
Yes.
And implicitly or maybe explicitly, is it inaccurate to say that the commissioner ordered new construction dismantled but did not set a date certain for its removal?
The issue at hand for not setting a date certain was mine. Ms. Snyder requested that I take a certain action. I looked into the situation.
And you said no violation?
Correct.
Okay, so you did not order something to be dismantled without a date being given. It's that you felt that something did not have to be dismantled.
Right, so essentially what I had said, that as it exists today, it complies. But in the future, and there's a quote in there, there's a specific fourth floor area that after the fire was deemed to have an illegal unit in it, that has since been removed, and the attic area is all storage only. And the third floor unit is a duplex, so the condo owner has rights to the third and the fourth floor. At the same time that some of this construction work was going on, there was a zoning board of appeals case that was being pursued to try to get a fourth floor unit. And I think that threw some of the issues, or clouded the issue. That case has subsequently been withdrawn, and as Ms. Snyder had said, a number of issues came up during that process, which I am trying to put in place with new rules and regulations with respect to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I'm working on that with Ms. Snyder and Bobby Nabel. Back to the issue at hand, Commissioner Shepard issued the permits, issued a certificate of occupancy, and this staircase was on the plan, and he issued a CO. I found nothing in the files that would have me overturn any decision that he had made. In the meantime, the property owner had come to me and asked if he wanted to finish that fourth floor and combine it with the third floor, what would he have to do? And in that instance, I said that stairway would have to be removed because it was an external stairway, provided access to a storage area only. If he was to then construct a fourth floor living area, it would provide an easy access, or in my view, easy way to create another illegal unit. So the stairway would have to be internal to the unit between the third and the fourth floor, and that stairway would be removed. So that's a little bit of the background.
Okay.
So I think, though, if her explanation is not the actual warrant article. The warrant article is to see if we will require you to specify in all decisions or rulings, and it says relating to condominium common areas, a date by which any action required pursuant to such a decision or ruling must be taken. I don't see why you object to that, because that's actually what you say you're doing. So what's the objection? That's what I don't get.
Because the earlier comments were that it's so narrow and site-specific. We already do it whether it's a condo or not. So this creates, I guess, a special exception for condominium common areas.
You're saying it's unnecessary, basically.
Yeah, we do it already. If there's a violation, building code or zoning bylaw, we already set a date certain. We give them 30 days from receipt of the notice that's sent via certified mail, and we proceed from there.
Well, I think you actually just heard in the anecdote there why it's not always appropriate to have a date certain. The commissioner just described the actual facts here, and the decision was that the stairway would have to be removed. That's a common area in the stairway, would have to be removed if and when the fourth floor was ever developed into a unit. There wasn't a date certain that was appropriate in that ruling. That kind of shows that the warrant article actually doesn't make sense. There could be rulings that relate to common areas that don't need a date to
But I think
to
it
do
goes
something
back
by.
to, it says pursuant to such decision or ruling. Him giving advice to an owner, gee, if you wanted to do this, you'd have to do that. It does not count, I don't think, as a decision or ruling.
It's not action required.
He can make a decision
Right.
that says, at such time as the fourth floor is developed, the stairway will be removed. There's no date, it's just,
you
it just
make
stands
dis-
out there.
Would you make advice to an owner?
Well, that's
You
not-
wouldn't make it in the form of a decision or something, would you?
I mean, this is a very unique case, and I've been dealing with it since I first arrived here. It hasn't come up in any other area of town that I can recall. But we do, customers, residents, architects, engineers come in to the counter constantly and seek advice on zoning and building code issues for which we will assist and verify that it's code compliant under zoning and/or building code. I wouldn't consider those a ruling or a decision.
Right, neither would I.
That an action, had to be taken. But
Yeah.
we do certainly assist people all day long, and there are a number of decisions made where we say, no, you can't do that, it violates code, and there's a process for that if somebody didn't, agree with it.
Yeah,
They could
right.
appeal it to the
This could be
BVRM.
really cumbersome if a developer's building a new condominium building, and they're building a hallway, and the building commissioner has to rule on maybe some material that's gonna be used. In every instance that a decision needs to be made that affects a common area of a condominium, they gotta remember to put in, and you gotta install this by November 1st, or,
So I do see a problem in that what you just said is, or what he just said, somebody just said, if you're just saying, no, you can't do this, which would be a decision on your part or a ruling on your part.
can't do it by November 1st.
Well,
I mean, why would you wouldn't have a date in there if you can't do it. If you're saying no, you can't do it.
In that instance, whether it's zoning or building code, they could appeal that to the BVRS.
So you would have
or
a
the
date
zoning
in
bylaw.
there by which they could appeal it or something, but you're
Well,
just saying no.
A verbal decision happens constantly. I haven't had, usually they would say, can I get that in writing, and then they would,
Right,
Yeah.
but just let's be clear.
which happens.
Rulings and decisions can be in favor or not in opposition to actions that might be taken.
Right.
You
but-
can approve something and it's a decision.
But then it wouldn't
And then,
be-
as Selectman Goldstein says, all right, do you have to have done it by such and such a date?
Yeah.
But
But I mean,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think something can be counted as a decision or ruling if it's not in writing. I don't think that his advice to somebody can be counted as a decision or
The
ruling.
building commission, the building inspectors and the commissioner make hundreds and hundreds of field decisions about how buildings are constructed and how renovations are made, in the course of a week. And some of them involve common areas, and with this warrant article.
And those would be not written, you're saying?
Yes, well, sometimes, right?
If they're in the field, it would be more of a verbal thing, again, unless they ask for it to be in writing.
But
That's
it's,
rare on a field inspection, but it does happen.
the language of this article, as I read it, simply says that you need a date certain by which any action required pursuant to a decision has to be taken.
right.
So if if somebody comes in and, I got a building permit to do work, that doesn't require that action. There that expires after a certain period of time, but my building permit didn't say you have to do this within 30 days. It's when there's a violation that you require action to be taken to remove. And what I'm hearing is that when there's a decision or a ruling that requires action to be taken, you already say that that has to happen within 30 days.
Yes. And
So-
in this instance,
And
there's a disagreement between,
as to whether you should or you shouldn't require action, and you
Correct.
felt that you didn't need to, that there was no violation. Ms. Snyder believes that there is a violation, but this article wouldn't apply to this situation. Yeah, I mean, okay, but more generally, what Commissioner Bennett is saying is that when he does require action, then he does already put in a 30-day period across the board. So hearing that, it seems to me that unless I'm missing something, this is not necessary. This will not change any policy.
Well, if it's written in that
You
way,
have to
then
come to the microphone.
Okay, I'm sorry, you do have to go.
If it's that way, I would like to see it, and if it is dovetails with what I'm asking for, then I can withdraw my,
Okay. Okay, and you should get to the airport. to
yeah,
pick
I
it
do,
up.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
All right,
okay.
all right.
And I'm
We're
sorry-
not going to take action on
Yeah,
this,
and
so
I'm
it's
sorry, may I-
okay for you to go.
Yes, may I, I'm sorry, I'm not thinking clearly. May I submit to you the written copy of the decision so you can look at it thoroughly yourselves?
Sure.
Okay, yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
It's a public hearing.
I don't think there's anyone here.
Mr. Fry, maybe.
Would anyone like to speak on this article? Seeing and hearing none, we're going to go back to the solar array on Single Tree Hill. Ms. Goff, you're going to walk us through this?
Yes.
Now, this actually is part of the MAPC program that we discussed, is that right?
Correct. So we participated in a request for qualifications with the MAPC for a regional solar procurement program. And as a result of that, we have a number of town roof sites, and this is our ground-mounted site. The Single Tree Hill site, which I'm going to be calling up in just a second, is near the Chestnut Hill Benevolent Association. And so this is just one view of it.
This is our expensive water tower.
Your favorite.
Yes.
So this is a result of the green community. One of the criteria that we had to become a green community was to allow by right zoning for renewables. So this would be the area that was zoned. So all the warrant article seeks to do is ask town meeting to authorize the selectmen to enter into a lease agreement, which we would need in order to engage with the Broadway, the third-party solar developer, in order to put solar arrays on this site.
Now, let's be clear, we're putting them on the ground, right?
Correct.
Not on top
This is
of
the
the
only
water
ground-mounted
tank.
site that we have.
Right, okay.
Well, there is a tank underneath that site.
Right, but somehow, when we talk about it, some people have said to me, what are you going to put on top of the water tank?
Nope.
All right, I just want to be clear.
Yep.
There,
Go, sorry, go ahead.
there do seem to be trees
Yeah.
around the perimeter of the site. Are they going to stay?
I believe that there is there needs to be a buffer of 25 feet. And I believe that the site gets cleared pretty regularly. DPW needs to keep it pretty clear. So having the panels on the site would actually be a benefit for them. In terms of where the panels are actually going to go, I think we're going to be getting hopefully some drawings soon from the solar developer as to how they would be placed on the site. Once they take a look at it, they haven't even been up there yet. I mean, I think it's going to be a little bit longer before we kind of get a better visual of where they would go.
But the trees would stay to protect the neighbors from,
I doubt it.
Well,
I
from
know.
above.
What
they
I've
look-
seen, they clear cut where they put these things up.
They look like pretty substantial tree cover that's there. now around the perimeter of the site.
You
And
know,
I sure would like to know
Yeah.
what's going to happen to those trees if we approve this.
Yep.
And you do know we have a bylaw about cutting down trees against certain, if they're a certain size or something.
Yeah, I believe when the site was first toured, when this was being considered for the renewable zoning, I believe that Tom Brady was part of the people who went up for the
Okay.
tour. So he and Commissioner Pepper Sturgeon are well aware that we are considering this site. So, but I will ask about the trees to make sure that that's something that, you know, you're informed about before we enter into any type of agreement.
Okay.
All right?
All right, so the question then is, are we prepared to take a position on
No.
this article now or not?
No.
No, okay, fine.
Did
Thank
anyone want to
you.
speak on this one?
No. Would you please get up and
My
speak
one-
so
my one solar
Selectman
fan
Daley will
left
feel
earlier.
like we've had a public hearing?
They don't have to, but
No, I think someone is volunteering. No, you don't want to volunteer. All right. Then let's take up the final article, which is a resolution opposing a U.S. attack on Syria. Mr. Farlow.
Good evening. My name's Frank Farlow. I'm a Precinct 4 town meeting member. This warrant article, a resolution stating that Brookline opposes the U.S. attack on Syria, was submitted by John Bassett, David Clafter, Maralise, and myself, all town meeting members. At the time, the Obama administration had just begun a full court campaign to persuade Congress to authorize the administration's plan to attack. Since the situation in Syria was very fluid and we couldn't predict the form that we'd ultimately like the resolution to take before town meeting, we provided leeway to amend it later to cover either of two possibilities. First, an attack has not yet occurred, but remains a possibility. And second, the U.S. has already carried out an attack. If no attack has been carried out, it's our intent at present to modify the language to declare Brookline's opposition to military action, commend the administration for its restraint, and urge the administration to instead pursue a diplomatic course. If an attack has been launched, the amended resolution will state the town's opposition, urge immediate cessation of any military action still in progress, and again urge pursuit of a diplomatic course. There have already been significant developments, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Putin proposed a deal involving Syria surrendering its chemical weapons. The U.S. and Russia then quickly reached agreement, and Syria in turn promised to hand over its chemical weapons by mid-2014. More recently, Obama took another step in the direction of easing tensions in the Mideast. Following an exchange with Iran's new president, Obama said that Iran's diplomatic overtures offer a possible basis for a, quote, meaningful agreement, unquote, on Iran's nuclear program. And Kerry is due to meet with his counterpart, I believe, this Thursday. These diplomatic developments, of course, offer grounds for optimism, but only cautious optimism at this point. The whereas clauses outline a number of compelling reasons the U.S. should be pursuing diplomatic resolution of the Syrian situation, a full-blown civil war, rather than continuing the Bush administration's policy of unilateralism in the face of public opinion, world public opinion. Primary among them, in my view, is the following, and I quote from a resolution adopted by a large majority of town meeting members shortly before the Iraq invasion. Human progress resides in respect for international law and for the sovereignty of nations. As the most powerful of these nations, the United States has a special responsibility to uphold and abide by broadly supported principles of international behavior, such as the following: laid out in the UN Charter. 1, no nation shall use military force except in self-defense. 2, the Security Council is the only body that can authorize the use of force. And 3, only the Security Council can decide what action can be taken to maintain or restore international peace and security. During debate on this resolution a decade ago, Don Weitzman pointed out that Bush's unilateralism represented, quote, a radical reversal in American foreign policy from long-held bipartisan support for multilateral cooperation and respect for international institutions. What he said a decade ago still holds today. We in PACS, Mass Occupy Brookline, and the Massachusetts Green Rainbow Party hope town meeting will maintain its long-standing and proud tradition by expressing its view that the doctrine of unilateralism is both extremist and counterproductive, and our country should be working towards solving its many expensive problems here at home, such as education, healthcare, jobs, and retirement security. And it should be leading the way by facilitating collaborative and peaceful approaches to problems beyond our own borders. Finally, the purpose of the footnotes is to enable town meeting members to conveniently click on the links after I email them a digital copy. To check the validity of the arguments presented, we'll consider deleting them in the final version of the resolution.
Or you might need to add new ones. Questions for Mr. Barlow? Selectman Daley.
Yeah, I actually do. I am conflicted on this one, which I was opposed to the war in Iraq. I was agreed with you that it was long past time we got out of Afghanistan. And I have some problems with it because certainly right now, diplomatic solutions look possible and look reasonable, but I don't think we would have gotten to this point without the threat of some violence. And I still, when I think of Rwanda, feel that my country didn't do something it should have done. And I have some concerns about if we're talking about a tax for the purpose of nation building or something like that, I'm entirely in agreement with you. When we're talking about a country using chemical weapons, nerve gas against its own citizens, I have a few more questions in my mind about what is our moral responsibility.
Shall I respond?
Sure, if you.
I think that's likely to be the most popular reason for discomfort with, if not opposition to this proposal. It's a position that certainly will be taken by some thoughtful people. It's my own view that the Bush administration made some steps that were catastrophic in international relations. And one of them was to say that the Geneva Conventions were quaint, I think the word was, and that international agreements basically be damned. We're the strongest country, and we will use our strength to achieve our goals wherever and whenever. And to me, the unilateral statement that Obama made, I'm sorry I don't have the quotation before me, back at the time that we initiated this proposal, was to the effect that we'd like to get the support of the UN, but with or without the UN, we want to go forward. Well, that in more sophisticated language is something that Bush could have said. And it's not something that would commonly have been said by previous administrations during the 40 or 50 years following World War II. Nowadays, it's become much more popular to oppose paying U.S. funds to the UN, to raise questions about treaties we've already signed, etc. I am just very concerned that when you step out in that direction with regard to the UN Charter, which is supposed to be the law above all other laws, without changing the Charter, then you're taking a unilateralist step, as I said, in the face of world opinion. And even in Europe, as the whereas clauses point out, public opinion is strongly opposed to this move.
Well, I'm in agreement with you about.
The threat is not the same thing as carrying it out. That's technical, of course, but I would agree with you that.
No, I think
that
we're in
there's-
the best possible position now, having made the threat but not having to act upon it. But I'm wondering, I think your warrant article is saying we shouldn't have even made the threat.
Well, we didn't say that.
Okay.
I have a slight.
I don't know what we would have said had I thought of it.
Selectman Goldstein.
I have a slightly different nuance of opinion than Selectman Daley, but I think it's worth highlighting. So, and I, like you, I opposed, at least in my private discussions with people, I opposed any military action against Syria a month ago when it looked like it might be imminent. I thought that as horrible as chemical attacks are on civilian populations within your own country, so far what had happened was fairly limited in scope, and I did not think that we had arrived at the level where unilateral action was necessary. However, having said that, world politics and world military action is a very fluid situation, and by the time this warrant article passed and was approved by our own Attorney General, we could find that Syria has not just attacked its own civilian populations, but possibly made chemical attack against other nations outside of its borders. And while the United Nations is certainly a great venue for trying to come to a worldwide consensus on military action and the need for military action, I don't see it as the ultimate arbiter. I think there are times when the United States has to act despite the lack of a consensus at the United Nations. And I worry that your warrant article, because it's so broadly stated, that you believe that an attack on Syria by the United States is not justified. By the time this is adopted, we could find that the fluidity of world politics has changed sufficiently that I no longer believe that it's not justified. Something could have happened by then. So I wonder that this is kind of underscores the limitations of a local warrant resolution as a mechanism to affect world politics. And, we might be at the limit, but I offer you the chance to respond, Frank.
I've told others that it seems to me that unfortunately for you, the only wise thing you can do is anticipate reconsidering this warrant article very shortly before town meeting, when we will have attempted to put it into its final form, and we will know much more to what degree your concerns
have indeed materialized.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone else here who wants to speak?
David is a petitioner.
I know.
As a petitioner, David Clafter, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 12. In consideration of the late hour and the unfinished form of this, I'll keep my remarks very brief. I think I wanted to respond to your questions, which I think are very legitimate, that were Syria to attack outside of its borders, that this would be a whole different set of circumstances, that in fact the question of self-defense and defense of allies becomes relevant there, which it is not currently in terms of intervening in a civil war. To speak briefly to Selectman Daley's comments about Rwanda, I think that in fact mobilizing the international community against various genocides that have occurred and are occurring is an extremely important political objective that should be worked for both by the populace and the government. For instance, in the Congo now we can see that 6 million people have probably died in the ongoing civil war there, that the international community has been unable to get its resolve together to deal with. I think this is extremely unfortunate. But I would just like to suggest that while there's no question that Assad in Syria is a very nasty character, and probably his regime, either him directly or some elements of his military, are responsible for this chemical attack, though probably is important because that has not been definitively established. The rebel forces that we would ostensibly be aiding with this attack also include numerous people that we would be very unhappy to see in power in Syria and who have proven themselves very capable of, in fact, launching attacks of a massive nature against civilians. So it's not even clear that we would be achieving our own objectives or objectives that would help the Syrian people by carrying out such an attack. I think further, just briefly, to my mind, the obscenity of this country authorizing a blank check for this kind of an attack in the same week that it's voting to cut off food stamps to hungry people, I found very, very distressing. That goes beyond this resolution, obviously, but it's part of the context of it. We clearly are in a very fluid situation. We hope that the resolution we present in the end will be praising the skilled diplomacy of our government for arriving at a good conclusion and moving towards a comprehensive peace in the region. I'm somewhat doubtful that that will be the case, but I'm certainly hopeful, and I really don't have anything further to add to that.
Now, I will grant you it's hard to figure out who the good guys are there, but I think children dying of sarin gas are certainly, whatever their religious or background may be, certainly are the innocents in the situation.
Though it should be remembered that the last time we jumped in to support a Saudi-sponsored insurgency in another country, we got the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
Well, that argument is basically an argument that it's not in our self-interest to do this. And, you know, you could, I guess, support this resolution on that basis. But that's not the same as saying that we shouldn't do it for the reasons articulated in the resolution.
Well, I think part of the basis of the resolution is in fact that we have other objectives domestically that are much more important than intervening in a civil war in the Mideast. I do think that this.
Okay, just, I don't want to belabor the point, but that's certainly what people said about Rwanda, too.
That is some of what was said about Rwanda. And in Rwanda, I believe, and I shouldn't say too much about this because I'm not fully up on the history of that, but the appropriate intervention would have been an aggressive, muscular UN intervention. There was a UN intervention, but it lacked all force, lacked sufficient force to be an effective tool, as was the case in the Balkans when UN troops stood by and watched massacre of civilians occur. The solution of that dilemma of the inability of the UN to effectively intervene is somewhat beyond the scope of this warrant article, but
this
it's
is
a cause for concern still.
But stopping Syria is stopping Syria from, never mind.
Okay, I think we've heard that this is a complex issue on which there are going to be shades of opinion. So, thank you, Mr. Clafton.
No, I applaud you guys bringing the issue up. I'm just somewhat conflicted. I don't mean to.
It's a difficult situation.
Right. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is making some board and commission appointments. The traditional way of doing this is to ask our town administrator, or in this case, our substitute town administrator, to read off the candidates.
Well, I hope I can do it justice then.
Mr. Cronin, I've turned over the list to you, and I believe we can take a vote on the candidates, first Building Commission and then Transportation Board.
All right, so Building Commission, there's one vacancy and one candidate. And that's Karen Breslowski.
Aye.
Aye.
It sounds unanimous.
And I think we have to vote
Oh, the
two incumbents as well?
No, not necessarily, because we haven't seen their requests. They're not before us right now.
Okay.
And then Transportation Board, one vacancy and one candidate, Scott Englander.
Aye.
Aye.
It's a unanimous vote. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Cronin.
My pleasure.
That concludes the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Tuesday, September 24th.